This episode of JJ Meets World is brought to you by Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty. Natalie has a proven track record to get your home sold faster and for more money. She is consistently focused on her clients' needs and wants throughout the entire process and make sure that they are well taken care of. If you're looking to buy or sell, reach out to Natalie today. On average, Natalie sells a home every 3.74 days. That's at least 2 a week. And last year, Natalie earned her clients on average over $4,000 above list price on their homes. And you don't have to take our word for it. Here's some of the great reviews Natalie has received. I was overwhelmingly impressed with Natalie and all the Hatch team. She was very responsive and responded to all of the emails within an hour. She gave great advice and encouragement from the listing and pictures, the offer, and all the closing details. The marketing team knew exactly how to promote my property, and I was pleased by how soon and easily my property received an offer. I was actually dreading selling my condo, and Natalie did such an awesome job that I felt like I really didn't need to do anything. The thing I most appreciated was that she really listened to what I wanted to do and respected my decisions. I would definitely recommend Natalie and all the Hatch Realty team. They made this process so wonderful. That was from Diane. So listen, if you're in the mood to buy or sell a home, give Natalie a call right now. You can reach her at 701-388-9338. Natalie, Natalie, at hatchrealtyfm.com, or you can go to livefargomorehead.com. That's livefargomorehead.com and find out some information. Huge thanks to Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty for sponsoring JJ Meets World.
Hey everybody, this is not JJ, this is Tucker. The reason you're hearing me right now instead of JJ, and the reason I sound like I'm talking to you in the inside of a tin can, is because we had a little bit of an audio corruption file right at the end of our recording session we did this weekend when he did the intro. No worries, the whole episode itself is totally fine. Just the intro's gone, so I'm recording this last minute in my house just so I can get this thing out on time. So that's why you're hearing something a little bit different. This is part 1 of a 2-part episode series on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Avengers Endgame just came out last Friday, and JJ and I just went bonkers over that movie, and we thought, let's do a retrospective of all 22 films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So sit back and relax and enjoy part 1 of a 2-part episode for JJ Meets World.
1, 2, 3, 4. JJ Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. JJ has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirls as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
The year is 2008. I, JJ Gordon, I love movies. I love movies, and I know very little about the Marvel comic book world. I've got an idea, and I've been to things like the X-Men movies. I even saw that old Captain America movie that Ned Beatty was in. Mm-hmm. I've even, at this point, I believe, seen a bootleg of the Fantastic Four that Roger Corman did in the 90s.
When you say the old Captain America movie, are you talking about the 70s one or the 80s one?
The 80s one.
Okay.
I believe it's the 80s one.
Because the 70s one is not to be missed.
Oh, is it really?
Oh, man.
Oh.
Because his shield is like clear plastic.
Oh, lovely.
And it's mostly like a motorcycle outfit. Yeah, pretty great. A lot of like the $1 Million Man sound effects, you know, where when you jump. Usually what he would do is his powers, you would see him jump from one level of like a building to another and then get into fights with guys.
See, Cap, not much changes with him, as we'll find out.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm introduced to Iron Man, and I remember thinking like, ooh, Robert Downey Jr., that's an interesting choice because this guy doesn't necessarily scream Hollywood stardom to me. Jon Favreau's directing, though, and I really like Swingers, so I've got good feelings.
He had made Elf. That was the previous film he had made.
Yeah.
And that was the one that Kevin Feige actually brings up when saying, when we were piecing this together, I had seen Elf, and I wanted to work with Jon Favreau.
I had this neat ability to go into this kind of cold, not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing who the major villains and players are. And my background of comic books was very, very, very slim. I had read Red Sun at that point, which is a DC graphic novel. So I was excited about this. I have, of course, had also seen the awful Fantastic Four movies, and I'm not talking about the Roger Corman one. I can
That's
give
the
that
best one.
I can give that one. Yeah, big
That's the
pass.
best one.
I'm talking about the Jessica Alba and Chris Evans Fantastic Four movies. So that's how I went into this series. So when you hear me talking about these things and reviewing them, what's interesting to me is these things inspired me to go back to the comic books and to read a bunch of this stuff. And I had a really great time doing that. Tiger, what was your experience pre-Iron Man?
So I was a superhero comic book kid very, very early on. When I was probably, 4 or 5 years old, my dad gave me all of his old comic books, which were Bronze Age comics from the 70s. And so that was mostly Spider-Man, Captain America, and then Power Man and Iron Fist, who had a comic book together. And so I just got huge into superheroes then and became obsessive. And at that point in time, especially in the 90s, if you wanted to get into superheroes, but you didn't have the ability to read the thousands of comics that were out there, you just didn't have the money to even do it. The next thing you would do is you would get into the trading cards, because the trading cards always had little facts on the back, pieces of storylines that you may never have heard of before. And they would even come up with power rating systems as though it were a baseball card and you had to put stats on there. So you would be able to learn about these characters, daydream about these characters, and then talk to your friends about them, trade cards, argue about who would fight who would beat who. And then any piece of media that was superhero related that would come out, you would just soak it up, because there were cartoons, there were a few live action movies, most of which weren't very good, with the exception of like the Richard Donner Superman and the Tim Burton Batman. But at that point, if someone said to you, hey kid, they're going to be making an Avengers movie at one point and they're going to fight Thanos, I'd say you're lying to me. They're only ever going to make Batman. That's just the only one they're ever going to make. They'll never have the budget or the technology to do superheroes right. And man, I'm glad that that's not true. And I gotta give shout out or props to Kevin Feige for being the kind of film producer that we all really needed to guide this through. And I remember seeing Iron Man in the theater, and that post-credit sequence with Nick Fury when he comes in and says, you've just joined a larger universe and you just don't know it yet. That was so thrilling, because there was now this promise of maybe getting an Avengers movie down the line. And they hit it out of the park. So that was where I started, was early comic books, when being into superheroes, it was more of an out group. It was too nerdy and geeky, and it wasn't cool. And you didn't really tell people you were into it for fear of embarrassment or derision. But the thing that's amazing about these superhero movies that Marvel has put out is they've shown to a massive audience how awesome superhero tales really are, because it's the same hero's journey that we're doing all the time. There's just some extra polish to it, and flash and superpowers that are fun. And casting Robert Downey Jr. was the single probably best decision that they made, because they set the tone for everything to go forward, and then they started probably the most amazing superhero story arc we've ever seen in movies.
Oh, and in a character arc even itself. Okay, so let's also touch briefly on what Marvel's cinema was before the MCU era.
Yeah.
Because even the year that Iron Man comes out, within a year, we had Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, which was garbage. We had Spider-Man 3, which was garbage. Ghost Rider, which was garbage. X-Men: The Last Stand, way to go, because we all know Brett Ratner's got it going on. The other Fantastic Four movie, Elektra. Marvel didn't really have a very good record for putting out quality superhero movies. Now, I still can watch the first Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 and really get a kick out of them. I remember watching the trailer to the first Spider-Man movie, and you had Blade 2, Daredevil, oh my God, Ang Lee's Hulk, which I went into so excited. And even today, the idea was right, but everything was executed wrong.
Right. And the technology wasn't there yet.
No.
It just wasn't there for Hulk to really look great. And an important thing to know too about those Marvel movies is those were movies that were not being controlled by Marvel.
Right.
Those were movies that Marvel was sort of a partner in, and Kevin Feige was working for Marvel. So he worked on the Spider-Man movies and the X-Men movies and all this other stuff as a contributor, but not as those who made the decisions, because Fox or Sony were the ones paying the budget. It was their creative show and they were the one taking it. And then when I saw Iron Man, I think which was the very first movie that Marvel Studios itself produced, I think the fans saw that and said, that is Iron Man. I recognize that. That feels like it was lifted from the comic books. I'm a massive X-Men fan, and I've been a massive X-Men fan since 1992. And I like the first two X-Men movies. They're fun. I enjoy them. But they're also very much a Hollywoodized version of, let's make this cooler so that it's a movie instead of these geeky comics. So they sort of walk up to the edge of the feeling of those stories, but they never really get there. Hugh Jackman is great, but Wolverine is not tall, dark, and handsome, right? The X-Men are awesome, but they don't wear black suits like a biker gang. That's not in keeping with the feeling and themes of superhero movies. So it always felt like some Hollywood person looked at the property and said, that's great, but let's make our cool version of it, versus actually finding out what it is that makes these stories so beloved. And the MCU under Kevin Feige, that is what they were able to do. Even when their movies didn't hit it out of the park, they still felt like the stories of old. They still felt like they were coming from that place. Like, this is a studio that gets and understands these characters and why they work.
And they understand, I think, prior to Iron Man, the idea was like, these are action movies. Right. So we need to make them in the template of an action movie. You don't dig into the characterization of the fact that, like, in the X-Men, they're the freaks. They're the outcasts from society. And yet they still feel a need to help society. That's rich and meaty right there.
Exactly.
And we don't get that because we're spending so much time on car chase scenes.
Right. Like, the action stuff can entertain you, but the character work is what makes you emotionally invested. Mm-hmm. And once you're emotionally invested, that heightens everything else. I mean, the action sequences, once you care about the people involved, have such higher stakes at that point. So yeah, they focused on character, and that shows.
So let's go into Iron Man.
And so just so everyone knows, we're going to be going through in this episode the MCU movies leading up to Endgame. And then spoilers alert.
Spoilers everywhere.
Everywhere.
So if you have missed even one of these things, you're probably not going to want to listen to that chunk, because we're going to be talking about plot. We're going to talk about pop culture around it. So enjoy everybody.
This nerdery.
Yeah. Iron Man comes out. It's 2008. Robert Downey Jr. immediately goes from sort of a forgotten Hollywood era back to an A-list, because in this movie, they take a character that someone like myself has heard of, but I don't know anything about Tony Stark. I don't know that he's a billionaire playboy. I know that he wears a suit of armor, like a modern day knight, but nothing else about this. And they tell one hell of a backstory influenced by, like, current political geo events. Mm-hmm. I instantly fall in love with this character. I love Pepper Potts. I love what Jon Favreau as Happy. Everything about this movie works for me, including the fact that they lean into the song Iron Man.
Exactly. Oh yeah.
Which is, do you say that there is this song? I don't know. It is so good. Jeff Bridges, who I think they just said, you just do your own thing, Jeff Bridges. And he portrays a villain that we understand, but
Right.
villains get so much better as the MCU goes on.
Right. The character work really focuses more on the heroes in these earlier stories. And the MCU has a fairly abysmal track record of making villains that are more than just a two-dimensional Snidely Whiplash. They might have motivations, but those motivations aren't deeply felt or deeply explained. And that's okay. I mean, that is part of the genre. I mean, superheroes aren't necessarily a deep genre. It's a soap opera with superpowers and costumes. It's professional wrestling, right? And but that movie, the story of Iron Man is a redemption arc. It's a redemption story, and so that means that Tony Stark and Robert Downey Jr. were both going through sort of a redemption arc at the same time, which really helped that because the studio was incredibly reticent to bring Robert Downey Jr. in, but Kevin Feige and Jon Favreau went to the mat for him and said, this is one of the best actors on the planet right now. And he is absolutely the person that will infuse this character that most people don't know of with life. Also, I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but I want to say it was a year or two before they started production on Iron Man. They released a short cartoon, like a 3D animated cartoon targeted at kids that showed Iron Man hanging out with Spider-Man and Hulk, because they all knew who Spider-Man and the Hulk were. They didn't really know who Iron Man was, and they didn't understand that there was this sort of shared world that they all came from. So they put this like cartoon out there to try to raise awareness of Iron Man, and apparently it worked because Iron Man is now one of the most popular superheroes.
They've got it.
Oh yeah, they've got it. Although his suit is not made of iron, it's a gold titanium alloy. But
the thing I like about this is it's an origin story that is based around survival and guilt at the same time. The man who helps Tony build the Iron Man suit, he's unable to save. And it makes him rethink what his company does. It makes him rethink why he's a billionaire. He's this incredibly intelligent guy who you just sort of feel maybe has not been using his intelligence to the height of where it should be.
Right.
And so redemption is exactly the right word that you include with that. It also gets us primed for what Marvel becomes known for, the post-credit scene. In this, you get a post-credit scene where Tony is confronted by Nick Fury. The first time we see Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury, who, correct me if I'm wrong, in the comics, they actually started drawing Nick Fury to look like Samuel L. Jackson because they're like, well, that's the look we're kind of thinking about before he even took on the role.
Right. I can't remember exactly the time period this happened, but Marvel launched a series of comics called Ultimate, which was a parallel universe. It wasn't the main continuity. And in that universe, Nick Fury was black. And when they designed him after Sam Jackson, well before Jackson had ever even been cast as Nick Fury in the comics. They were like, what do we want him to kind of look like? And they thought, well, let's make him look like Sam Jackson. So it ended up being, there are a few things from that now defunct timeline in the universe that have made their way over to the main timeline. That's where we get Miles Morales from Enter the Spider-Verse. And there were a bunch of other titles along those lines. And some of those plot points have made their way into the MCU. But yeah.
Which is great.
Yep.
And then he brings up the Avengers initiative. So you find out that this movie is not just Iron Man. It's part of a bigger idea, a bigger concept, which is just so smart.
Right.
Just so smart.
There is something about that Easter egg, though, where I love watching those old movies because you can see how undeveloped the characters are at that point. So Sam Jackson had been hired to come in and just do this quick thing. They had no idea if it was going to be anything, right? And so his delivery on his lines are great because when Iron Man says, "Who are you?" he goes, "Nick Fury, agent of S.H.I.E.L.D." And he says it in this way that Nick Fury never says anything after the fact. That scene also reminds me, though, of something that I don't think was planned from the get. It wasn't planned from the get-go, I believe, but ended up being a really sort of happy accident later on, was hiring Paul Bettany to play the voice of Jarvis, which was, so Jarvis in the comic books is just a butler. The Avengers lived in a mansion and had a butler just like Batman has Alfred. That was Jarvis. In the movie, instead of having a butler, he has an AI that he's developed named Jarvis, voiced by Paul Bettany. semi-sentient AI, I guess. Sentient. It seems sentient enough that you can have full conversations with it. And well, I guess we'll get into later what that means down the road. But that was another one of those early things that they were then able to look at and take advantage of, which was amazing.
My last thought on Iron Man is they spend an extraordinary amount of time where they just let Robert Downey Jr. be by himself on the screen.
Yep.
He's got Jarvis and he has these conversations, but Jarvis isn't in a physical form.
Right.
He's got the helper robot that he, loves but treats like garbage. And there are huge amounts of time where it's just him on screen, whether it's during the testing phase of the new Iron Man suits. And I find that to be a very daring thing to do when they could have just been saying like, well, let's just, let's put a hot girl in the bed here, or let's have some other like fanboy people, or let's give some other like winks and nods to other things that are going on. But they really lean into it. And Robert Downey Jr. instantly becomes the snarky uncle that we all had been waiting for.
They also set up the in-helmet shot.
Right.
So one issue with superhero movies and celebrities is they want their faces to be seen. So what's a way to let Iron Man keep his helmet on, which is an integral part of his suit and is part of the look? Well, put the camera inside the helmet, quote unquote. And that was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah,
so
the overlay of the tech imagery and being able to read his he can act inside the suit. He's acting inside the suit.
Right. So you get these great Robert Downey Jr. emotive moments in the middle of a battle where you don't see faces.
So let's flash forward a month. This is released in May, which also sets a precedent too for Marvel May. Marvel owns the month of May until they decide like, well, we could open this a week earlier, and
they started having that Disney money.
Yep.
So like, we do what we want.
But it seemed like every year for a decade, Marvel had a movie that came out in May that just, spanked everything else that was out there. So let's flash forward a month to June 2008, and The Incredible Hulk comes out.
Edward Norton.
So this is the better of the two 2000 movie Hulks.
But not by much.
Not by much.
No, God, it is sort of tied with Thor: The Dark World, I think, for worst MCU movies.
And given this is Universal Pictures taking this on, and I think that they wanted Marvel to be involved, but they didn't give Marvel the keys to the kingdom the same way that Disney, Paramount, these other studios said, like, you go make us the best movie possible. Universal still had a lot of sticky fingers involved in this, which is why I think you get some of the bad choices that are made there.
You've all probably heard of the recent merger with Fox and Disney, which means that Disney now has characters again that they haven't had or Marvel has had for a while, hasn't had for a while, sorry. The X-Men, the Fantastic Four. Spider-Man is still owned by Sony, so they have a special deal to have Spider-Man in these movies, and the Hulk is still owned by Universal. So that's why we're not getting solo Hulk movies from Marvel Studios. They actually don't have the rights to do that, but they can put Hulk in their other movies. So their whole plan has been, if you just watch all of Hulk's scenes with Mark Ruffalo, you'll get a full Hulk movie in the middle of all of it.
Yep.
But Incredible Hulk it's got so many things wrong with it. It's just not a good movie. It's not worth spending too much time on.
They do an interesting thing, which is they skip the origin story on this. And this is not the sequel to Ang Lee's Hulk, but it's sort of the sequel to what we all know, how the Hulk got hit with gamma radiation.
Yep.
Starts off, Edward Norton's on the run. This is also the first time we have someone who appears in the MCU. And even though, it was Universal's version of it, who we never see again in Liv Tyler. She plays Betty Ross, who is Hulk's main love interest. And
she's the Mary Jane, she's the Lois Lane, she's the Pepper Potts
that we know of at this point.
In Hulk's world.
In Hulk's world, like, that's a big thing. We also get William Hurt cast as General Ross, who we see several other times, but it almost takes a decade for them to give him something that's got some meat on the bones after this movie. Gosh, Tim Roth is the villain. Sorry, Tim Roth.
Yeah.
It's just not working. Just not working for anybody.
Yeah. So in that movie, Hulk fights Abomination, which is Tim Roth's character. Abomination is sort of the main Hulk villain that can go fist to fist with the Hulk. Most of Hulk's villains are either the military or more cerebral, where they use brain power or some other thing to fight the Hulk. So, it made sense to put Abomination in a movie, but the movie just wasn't that good. And the design of Hulk was awful. He looks like he's wearing skinny jeans and he's got kind of a swooshy haircut and just doesn't work out. In my mind, I just ignore that movie exists. When I think of the MCU, I don't include that even though it is canon.
And they only make one reference to that entire movie, and it's in the Avengers when he goes, last time I was in New York, I sort of broke Harlem. Mm-hmm. So we're gonna
move on
right past it. So after that, we get a sequel to Iron Man. We get Iron Man 2, and it's 2 years. It's 2 years later. We could not have been more anxious for a movie to come out, and Iron Man 2 hits screens. I like it, but it also, you know what? I lied. The first time we have someone who leaves the MCU is Terrence Howard decides not to come back.
No, he didn't decide not to come back. He was forced out.
So Terrence Howard is no longer allowed in the playground.
Right. So when they made Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. made almost no money on that. The highest paid star in that movie was Terrence Howard. At that moment, he was riding high off of a few
Hustle
projects.
and Flow, I believe.
Hustle and Flow, yeah. And so they knew the whole thing was, we'll sign you up for a couple movies, and in the second one, you'll become War Machine, and all this stuff will happen. And the full story of what actually happened isn't out there, but from the pieces that I've gathered, it's a combination of Terrence Howard being notoriously difficult to work with, and it wasn't worth the money that they were paying him. They just thought, this is not worth it. So instead of firing him, they offered him the second movie at a far reduced amount, and knowing that he would walk away. And at that point, I think Downey, who is tight with Don Cheadle, was thinking, let's get rid of Howard and put Cheadle in here because he doesn't have any of that baggage. He's a better actor. He's more likable. And boy, am I glad that they did that.
Me too. I like Don Cheadle a lot. Yeah. In fact, I would gladly go see Iron Man 1 re-edited with Don Cheadle superimposed over Terrence Howard the whole time.
Okay, so a little bit off track here. So many fans over the years have taken the Marvel movies and edited them together in one massive movie, right? There's hundreds of copies like this out there. You can try to look them all. I myself, being a video person, have also attempted to do that. And now that Endgame has come out, I'll finally have all the pieces once that's on Blu-ray to do it. But in Iron Man, what I found you can do, you can actually just cut Terrence Howard out of it completely. The movie makes total sense without Rhodes even being there.
Yep.
So basically, just cut Terrence Howard out. He's just not there. And then Rhodey is first introduced in Iron Man 2 at the congressional hearing.
Great.
That's the first time he comes in.
Done.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Amazing scene, by the way. And I think the breakout star of Iron Man 2 is Sam Rockwell as Hammer.
Who shows us what Tony Stark could be.
Yeah.
Which I think is such a brilliant move to say, like, because he's a villain, right?
Yeah.
And he exists in a weird way because he's competing with Tony, and that's why he's such an asshole.
And they kind of make him he's almost the Microsoft to Iron Man's Apple.
Yeah.
Especially when he comes out for his own convention and does that little dance. And they're kind of making fun of Steve Ballmer from Microsoft, who there's a viral video of him going out at the beginning of a convention and giving this really strange dance. And yeah, Justin Hammer has all of the ego of Tony Stark, but with none of the genius acumen, really.
Yep.
He's just a huckster, straight up.
Yep.
And one of the
feels
best,
like a traveling salesman.
Exactly. And the best scene in the movie, my favorite scene in the movie, is when he meets with Rhodes.
He's showing
off all of the weaponry. And God, I wonder if they just let Sam Rockwell kind of go and improvise in that scene, because it's so good. And then when he brings up the ex-wife, which is the tiny little missile that he says is going to just destroy everything. These are the Cohibas, baby. These are the Monte Cristos.
It's such a great setup too, to the fact that their idea for an Iron Man prototype that the military controls is there's no good to it. It's all weapon. Right. It's all one giant weapon. That's what they see Iron Man as. And that's Tony is so egotistical that he doesn't feel he needs to explain to the government that the Iron Man is not a weapon. It's a tool.
Right.
But you kind of wonder, like, maybe if
even though it's covered in guns, and you can kill with it.
But yeah, and you could do that with a nail gun too, right?
Right,
it's
exactly.
got gun in the name, but it's made to create, not destroy.
I think it's clear that their issue is not that he is a weapon, but that he's a private weapon. He's a weapon that they don't control. He says in the thing, I've privatized world peace.
Yep.
And so that is their primary issue with him. The villain in that movie is Whiplash.
Yep.
One of the problems with Iron Man in the comics has always been that Iron Man has really lame villains. A superhero is usually only as good as their rogues gallery, which is why Batman is the most popular superhero on the planet, because his villains are the best. And Iron Man doesn't really have good villains. And the main Iron Man villain in the comics was the Mandarin, who is a very racist stereotype that wouldn't fit into that. So, the villain is kind of forgettable. Mickey Rourke is fun. Oh, this is what I was going to say. But I think an interesting point that movie brings up about the military industrial complex is when Justin Hammer brings in Whiplash to work on his machines. And Whiplash says, these are drones. You're not going to put people in them. Drones are better. And Hammer says, I can't sell this to the military unless I can put bodies in this, unless I can put people inside of it. And I think that's a very interesting thing, where the military is saying, no, we want to be putting bodies in this, lives in harm's way versus drone attacks. And it's an interesting part.
You're watching the actual real world evolution of the military during this point, because the U.S. military was trying to figure out, like, okay, do we like drones? Can you effectively complete a mission from 5,000 miles away?
Right. Iron Man also has set off effectively an arms race.
Yep.
So by creating the outfit, the armor, now all these other countries are trying to do a similar thing, including the U.S. government. And this becomes a theme later on, where Iron Man, in the other movies, where Iron Man's strength invites challenge and people who try to top it. And that's something that at this point in time, Tony Stark doesn't have the understanding or respect for. He thinks, I'm smart enough, I can always stay on top of it. He has no idea about space invaders and Thanos and death from the stars. He doesn't understand that yet.
But he does understand that there are other exceptional human beings out there. The post-credit sequence of Incredible Hulk, you get him talking to Ross in the bar. He grew up
with his father telling him about Captain America.
One thing I really like is, so Whiplash is the villain. You kind of feel for Whiplash a little bit, because he's avenging his father, who died in rags and had been cheated out of the arc reactor technology.
According
credit.
To him, the family's belief is that he was cheated. But like most villains,
would you put that past Howard Stark, though, to like take somebody else's name off and put it on?
No, I think, in my opinion, Howard Stark is brilliant enough to not do that. I don't think his ego needs that. But I think one thing, and Kevin Feige said this recently about Thanos, but it's true of most villains, is that they are unreliable narrators of what has actually happened. It kind of comes in later in Ant-Man and the Wasp, because a very similar thing happens with Dr. Pym and another scientist. And oftentimes we never get the full story, but my own personal opinion is that Howard Stark didn't cheat him out of anything. There may have been rivalry there, but I don't think that was what motivated Stark.
Because they show a version of the plans that have both names on it, and then the next version of the plans only has Howard Stark. So even if he had gotten pushed out of it, like let's say he got Terrence Howarded out of it, right?
Right.
That is the motivation you get for Whiplash, is that this is what he believes. And the MCU, if anything else, shows you that it's not necessarily the facts. Right. It's what a person believes.
Right.
And in a world where we don't understand what's going on all the time, belief is
very true.
Very important.
Very true. And it's also important to note that both Howard Stark and Anton Vanko were working on arc reactor technology, but neither of them created it. They couldn't miniaturize it. They could only be a large thing. So if anything, there may have been jealousy there, but there was no true accomplishment to look at, versus once Tony Stark, when pushed to the brink of death in that cave, is able to miniaturize an arc reactor and then it goes from there. And then Anton Vanko is able to kind of reverse engineer in his mind some of what Tony Stark has done, but is still getting things wrong, which we find out in Monaco when he's captured by the French police and Iron Man comes in to interrogate him. And the first thing he's saying is he's Tony's ego is so fragile, he needs to tear down what this other guy just did. And so he's telling him about the inefficiencies in his design. And yeah, love that moment.
It's great. And Leslie Bibb, who has ties to North Dakota, I believe born in
who did
Bismarck.
Leslie Bibb play?
She's the reporter that from Vanity Fair.
Really?
That he beds in the first one and then
She's
shows
in
up
North Dakota?
again. Yeah, she was born in Bismarck.
Really?
Yep. And Leslie Bibb, who I think is much funnier than people give her credit for. I'm not going to go on a huge Bibb thing here, but Leslie Bibb should be getting more roles. She is more than just an incredibly beautiful woman. She has got a great comedic sensibility, and she plays that up here.
Yeah.
It must be hard to hold your own against Sam Rockwell in some of those scenes, like when she's interviewing him in Monaco. And all of a sudden she wants to go talk to Tony Stark instead. And he's like, whoa. It's good stuff there. Also at the end of this, you get, you get way more into S.H.I.E.L.D. You find out way more about it.
Right.
You find out
amazing Coulson moments.
Phil Coulson, the character of Phil Coulson. I love it. Clark Gregg. Oh, you can do anything. Yeah. I love you so much.
And the introduction of Black Widow.
Right. And apparently a young Peter Parker at one point.
Yeah,
they say
they've kind of retconned that.
Yeah.
I just ignore it because I don't think it matters. But yeah, so technically that kid who's wearing the Iron Man helmet is Peter Parker.
Right. And then a post-credit scene in this that leads to Thor. You see Thor's hammer in the desert.
I will say that I love the scene when Black Widow and Happy Hogan get to the compound where Anton is. And we've got that great comedic moment where Happy Hogan is boxing with the first guard they come across. And so he's so distracted that he's not paying attention to the fact that Widow is wiping the floor with 15 different guys in a really phenomenal sense. And ScarJo did an amazing job selling that, as did her lifelong stunt double. I forget the woman's name that does most of the action sequences, filled in when ScarJo was pregnant. But and then when Happy Hogan finally beats the guy and goes, "I got him," and then turns around and just sees the decimation that Widow has left in her wake. It's pretty fantastic. Also, we've got that the shot of that donut on the top, and I drove past that donut a year ago.
Randy's
and took a
Donuts.
photo of it. Love that scene. Sir, please exit the donut. Great Sam Jackson scene.
So the next movie that we get is Thor. So Thor comes out what was it? I'm trying to find a release date here. Thor comes out May 6th, 2011. So this is a year after Iron Man.
Which we get that
Iron
is
Man 2, excuse me.
The post-credits sequence in Iron Man 2 leads us into Thor because Coulson has found the site of Mjolnir.
Yep. So my personal opinion is the Thor movies are fine for costuming. It introduces us to the galaxy concept, the universe, that there's beings from other planets. But said and done, I just don't get I don't get a lot of this, with the exception of I love Loki. Loki is a character that I can't get enough of, and he gets some great stuff in this. This is the most, I would say, stifling. Marvel does a great job balancing everything with humor.
Yeah.
And this is the least comedic.
Yeah. With a few standout moments.
Right. Like where he's drinking the coffee and he throws the cup on the ground like he's still in Asgard. One of the things that bothers me is he has traveled to other planets before, and he knows what it's like to interact with another race of beings.
Right.
And so for him to just naturally assume that this is the way that he can act, I found that so off. And for a while I was like, well, Chris Hemsworth, let's face it, is the weakest link so far that we have in this. And it turns out, nope. He just needed to be let off the leash.
Right, exactly. I mean, I would disagree in the sense that I think Natalie Portman is the weakest link.
Oh, I'm talking about the heroes.
Oh, okay.
Natalie
Not
Portman.
in the movie.
Yeah. Natalie Portman. That was a miscast right there.
Right.
Yeah.
Just not well written either. But Loki is the first villain in the series that shows vulnerability. And I think that was when they kind of start cluing into it too, is that Robert Downey Jr. and Hemsworth and Evans, those three heroes, and then Loki, they're so good at portraying vulnerability in someone who doesn't want to show it, that really wins you over. And so you really, even though Loki's decisions are bad and he makes the wrong choices for the wrong reasons, you still sympathize with him.
You know, I think that to me, so the Thor story here is more or less, it's who should supersede the throne. You get Anthony Hopkins in here, and this was a good, I think, another point where they're like, yeah, we're gonna cast Anthony Hopkins in
good
this.
Good casting choice for Odin. Although he did what Anthony Hopkins often does in movies, is you can tell he didn't read the script until that morning.
Yeah.
And is like, just give me cue cards. I'm gonna stand off to the side and read the cue cards, because his delivery is often so flat. You know, it doesn't come off. It doesn't always come off as a detached ruler.
Right.
Sometimes it does, and sometimes it just comes off as Anthony Hopkins going, "Nah, you pay me money and I'll show up. I'm Anthony Hopkins. I did Silence of the Lambs. Right?
Yep.
Just let me do my thing."
This is also another thing where, as we get further on to, S.H.I.E.L.D. would have been all over this immediately in later films. Like the second that something crash lands to Earth, there would be this big, huge, back and forth, and people would have something. In this, they're like, well, we're going to let this sleepy little New Mexico town just kind of get reduced to rubble. Like, it's no big deal. This story was more or less Thor was entitled to the throne, and he's got an ego about it.
You get the setup of what the things in Thor's world mean. So when he gets banished from Asgard, and then you get that amazing scene when Odin whispers into Mjolnir, the power that the hammer decides is, if you be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor, which ends up playing into, has meaning later on in the series. Another thing I'd just like to say about the Thor movies, because I was so one of my uncles on my mom's side was a big Thor fan as a kid. So at the lake cabin that we all share, there was always a massive pile of old Thor comics that were all torn up. So I got into Thor at a young age too, and my favorite characters in Thor were the Warriors 3, who unfortunately get real short shrift in these movies. They would have been great characters, but they didn't seem to know what to do with them.
I think the most annoying character in the entire MCU is Kat Dennings.
Really?
Yeah, who is Jane Foster's assistant. I find her, like, what business does she have? She doesn't seem to be interested in this at all. At least give me a throwaway sign of like, well, they are all out of lifeguarding opportunities, because I can't stand her. And it gets worse in the second Thor movie, where I'm just like, get off the screen, be gone. So at the end of this thing, you get to meet Heimdall, brilliantly cast, and I think through Thor is the movie where other actors started saying like, okay, well, there might be some fun spots for me where maybe I don't have to be on set for 5 months doing all the CG work, but there might be great small roles for me. Renee Russo as Thor's mother, I thought was a fun casting choice. Yep. And so you start to see some other little pieces here. The post-credit scene in Thor is really nice because Eric Selvig foreshadows the Tesseract, the fact that Loki is still around.
It's the first time we see the Cosmic Cube. The very first time we see the Cosmic Cube. And at that point, my understanding is they hadn't quite decided yet where all this was going, so they didn't really know that the space gem would be inside of the cube. The Cosmic Cube has been sort of in the Marvel Universe for a long time, although I didn't know too much about it going in, but yeah, the Tesseract.
Captain America, the First Avenger, is the next one that comes out. And I'll be honest, I thought Joe Johnston, well, geez, you just mangled that third Jurassic Park movie. Do I really want to watch another movie that you made?
Wolfman wasn't very good.
Oh God, it was so bad. Do you remember? I think we saw that together, didn't we?
Yeah. That was another Anthony Hopkins movie where he's like, I'm Anthony Hopkins. I'm just going to read the card.
It's funny, I didn't even think about it, but like Anthony Hopkins, Benicio del Toro, like both of those people ended up in the MCU. There you go, little things. So we are introduced to the character of Captain America in this. It's the first period piece that they had done with this. Brilliantly done. I love this idea. I love the idea that they weren't going to just bring the Captain America storyline to modern day. And there's so much stuff that plays into this. The fact that part of the serum that they use is what Bruce Banner 70 years later is trying to figure out. And he thinks gamma radiation might be the key. And that's what ends up transforming him into the Hulk. You get essentially the beginning of what S.H.I.E.L.D. is with Peggy Carter's storyline moving on after this. You get
Howard Stark.
And Howard Stark. You get a fun role from Howard Stark, which I was surprised that they didn't use more Howard Stark as years went on, because I would have liked to have seen that in between Howard Stark.
I believe, doesn't he have some in the Agent Carter? Doesn't he appear from time to time?
He does. Okay. He does. And Agent Carter, which is the unfortunate MCU series.
Is it bad?
It's not bad. It just needed more time.
Okay.
I think they canceled it too soon. And if they had given it more time, it really could have found its legs. I knew I loved this movie at one point. Like, when a movie surprises you, it's great. Captain goes through the serum and the radiation, and he is muscular, right? And then that agent of Hydra fucks everything up. Oh, I shouldn't have sworn. This is probably one for more kids. So maybe we'll beep that out.
Maybe if I remember.
Yeah, we'll see. So
it's not the worst thing they've heard today.
They immediately let Captain get into action to chase after this guy who's just killed. Was Stanley Tucci's character's name? I can't remember
the character's name, but the scientist.
Yeah, the scientist. So he's out there, he's running after him. That guy, like the villain, pushes that kid into the water, and you think, oh God, he's gonna lose this guy because he's gotta save the kid. He runs to the edge of the water, and the kid goes, "It's okay, I can swim. Go get him." It caught me completely off guard.
Yep.
Great moment, phenomenal moment. I was like, okay, I can get behind this. I was also weary about Chris Evans, because Chris Evans was garbage in the first those two Fantastic Four movies. And now I'm just going to chalk it up to those are just poorly written.
Yeah. So Captain America was one of my favorites growing up. I always loved the fact that his main thing, his shield, his weapon, was actually defensive and not offensive. Shields are not typically something you use for offense. You use to protect yourself. And I always thought that kind of said something about that character, what his motivations were, where his priorities truly lied. But yeah, when they announced Evans as the casting, I thought, damn it, what is going on here? This doesn't make any sense. And then the first trailer came out, and I thought, oh, okay, this might be going somewhere.
Right.
But when I saw that movie surprised me on absolutely every level. Not only the fact that Chris Evans was the perfect choice to play Captain America, but that the movie had so much connective tissue with the other movies. So you start and you're in that, I don't know if you're in Bavaria or whatever, and Hydra is sort of closing in because they're just an arm of the Nazis at that moment.
I believe it's in Norway.
Oh, you're right. It's in Norway. And they've got that giant carving of the tree Yggdrasil, which is the bridge between, it holds up Midgard or something. I can't remember in what it is in Norse mythology. And they refer to Odin's treasure chamber, and they find the Tesseract. You've got Howard Stark. You've got all these other things. Vibranium gets mentioned.
Howard Stark failing too, which is kind of funny, right?
Right. Yeah, such a good movie. And I really dug how they were able to reference all sorts of pieces of Captain America's past in the comics. The crappy costume that he's wearing when he's going around for war bonds, that's how he was originally drawn. And it's just such a good movie. The one negative about the movie for me is that when we finally get to the action sequence where Captain America is in the middle of the war with the Howling Commandos and fighting Hydra, is we get it sort of in like a quick cut where you're just getting sort of the highlights. I would have liked to have seen much more of that action where they're actually waging the war.
Interesting. And I think that would probably play into it pretty easily. Right. The guy who plays Hitler in where he punches out, where he gets to punch out Hitler during the stage show, I believe ended up playing Neville Longbottom's dad in the Harry Potter series,
awesome.
Which you only see in a photograph of the Order of the Phoenix. But that's one of those roles where for a while, and I think that there was a special on it, but there were people who looked like Saddam Hussein who they cast as Saddam Hussein in movies when they were making it. And there are people who look like Hitler and get cast as Hitler in all of these movies. And that's your main role is you look like a piece of garbage human being that we need to include as a villain. I also love the fact Alan Menken writes the Star Spangled Man song, and he does a great job with it. And I love how at the beginning, Captain, like, he doesn't really fit well on stage, but then he gets, like, it's almost like he's enjoying it by, like, the end, or he's just so comfortable enough. And it's a great, again, another part where it surprises me is I thought, okay, so here's what's going to happen is he's going to get so wrapped up in being famous. And it's like, nope, that's not at all, because it shows him at a USO, and they do not give a crap.
His
about
motivations
the show.
are still the same. He's told this will help. That this is the thing that's going to help do it. But he's realizing too that he's just a monkey. He's just a dancing monkey.
So this one also shows the first big sacrifice. I mean, essentially, we think that Steve Rogers has.
If you weren't into the comics.
Yep. Right. So he's going to pilot this. He's going to crash this ship. And he's gonna do it to save people. What did you think of Hugo Weaving as Red Skull? Because I hear people on both sides of the fence saying Red Skull is horrible. I hated what Hugo Weaving did with it. It was garbage. And then to me, I'm like, I liked him as Red Skull.
Oh yeah, no, I thought he did great. He did awesome. I love the Red Skull. I'm glad he was the villain. It sounds like Hugo Weaving didn't have the best time doing it, which is why he didn't come back later on. But no, I thought it was fine. He is a megalomaniac, world-dominating villain, which is most comic book villains. So there's no deeper motivation like you get with Killmonger or Thanos. But no, I thought he was great. I don't see a single thing wrong with his performance.
All right, and then at the end of this, the post-credit scene is actually a scene from Avengers. So this is another thing that Marvel did. And this actually, I don't like. I don't like when Marvel uses a piece from another movie as my post-credit scene. I know it's exciting, but why not just give me a trailer at the end of it? Let the post-credit scene be the first view you can get of the trailer to the next movie. But it's where Nick Fury approaches Captain America with a mission, and he punches the crap out of that punching bag, and it shows that he's got many more. So it must have happened before. And then we know that we are going to get the Avengers, the next movie a year later. Oh, also quick note. So just from a business marketing standpoint, they released this at the end of July, Captain America, the First Avenger. Right. This should have been a 4th of July release, because I went out there being like, USA, USA, go, 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 USA. The same way I did with Spider-Man. Right. So I think this probably could have made more money as a 4th of July release, or at least got a little more like rah, rah, rah. Yeah. But if that's the biggest qualm I've got, who cares? So the year's 2012. It's 10 years after I graduated from high school, and I get really excited to go see the Avengers. Joss Whedon is going to be running the ship. At this point, we've really known him for Buffy, and we've been
Firefly.
People are excited for it. Yeah, and it had Serenity come out yet? Yeah, it had.
Yep, and he'd also written a bunch of Marvel comics, so he had written a bunch of X-Men comics.
So they're like, oh, it's kind of neat. This is the first real feeling that we are watching an extended universe. We're going to see characters interact with each other from other movies. It also is one of my favorite genres of films, which is let's get the gang together. I love that. It's what they did in the first Muppet movie. It just is a fun thing to sit through. Great opening sequence taking place. You've got Eric Selvig is doing tests on the Tesseract. When the movie starts, the Tesseract has already started like beeping and buzzing and junk like that. You find out Loki is going to be our big bad. You also get the first allusion to Thanos.
Yep.
And the Chitauri. this is another piece of poor acting. Whoever is the Chitauri like general right there, the way he even like interacts with the set is subpar. Yeah. And maybe it's
very
supposed
cheesy.
to make us look like
very cheesy.
It feels like it's something out of a high school play.
I forget that character's name because he has a name specifically.
Does he?
He does. But yeah, I can't remember what.
You doubt his power.
Yeah.
And so we get into it. Great. And you get to see Nick Fury in action right off the bat. You get to see that Phil Coulson's there. You get introduced to Maria Hill, and they lay the foundation for, in my opinion, the most fun Marvel movie of them all.
Okay.
This is the one that that summer, our local theater chain had a thing called the Magical Movie like Passport, and it was $25 a month, and you could see all the movies you wanted. And this is no joke, saw this movie 10 times in the theaters.
Wow.
Yeah. This movie became the thing that my now wife and I did for dates.
Wow.
And every time I got goosebumps while watching it.
Multiple times. You got her to go multiple times.
Oh, she and I saw it together probably 4 times.
Wow.
So opening weekend, I saw this movie on like a Friday morning.
Okay. And
then I saw it again Friday night. And then I went to it again on Saturday. So 3 viewings in 1 weekend alone.
Nice.
The story, we find Black Widow. She's interrogating someone. It's a great, moment with her. Like, I'm working right now.
Mm-hmm.
This idiot's telling me everything. What? They tell her everything? You also get to meet Mark Ruffalo as Bruce Banner.
Yep.
Finally,
they get the Hulk right.
Yep. They finally. You get to see that Steve Rogers cutscene.
Yep.
You get to see Tony Stark has now built Stark Tower, and they really lean into the fact of renewable energy in this, and that the want for the Tesseract isn't necessarily for a world domineering power. It's a want for clean, sustainable energy until it's the MacGuffin of this, right?
Well, that's what S.H.I.E.L.D. says.
Right.
S.H.I.E.L.D.'s real purpose is to weaponize it because they realize that there are threats outside of the world in the universe.
Yep, which we get in a nice lengthy bottle scene.
And according to Fury, it was the arrival of Thor that made them go, all right, it's time for us to figure out how we weaponize this thing because we don't have the ability to fight Asgardians if they decide to come to Earth again. That movie also sets up the dynamic between Captain America and Iron Man and how they conflict and how their personalities don't mesh and then where they end up complementing each other in the end, which is really signified when it's that hero shot of all the Avengers in downtown New York and it
circles around
and then Iron Man says, call it Cap, because he realizes that the best field commander there is Captain America.
Yep. This movie has one of my favorite scenes as well that takes place in, I believe it's like Stuttgart, Germany. Where Loki has, we don't know if he's killed that guy, but we know that he definitely did something messed up to his eye. So that Hawkeye is turned. We find out that he can touch someone with a scepter and turn them.
Right.
And so he leaves the ballroom where he's done something unthinkable to this dude's eye.
Right.
And he puts on his regular Loki costume.
Right.
And he tells the people to kneel, and he says, I am going to free you from freedom.
Mm-hmm.
It's the worst. Freedom is the worst thing ever.
Right.
And he thinks that he thinks he's doing what he thinks is right. He
knows that the Earth matters to Thor. Mm-hmm. So he's largely motivated by getting back at his brother and taking away from his brother something that matters to him. And also Loki believes that he is a king. Like he deserves to rule, and this is what he needs. And we don't quite know it, but he's made an unholy alliance with Thanos, who has given him an Infinity Stone. We don't know if Thanos knows that the Mind Gem is in the middle of the scepter, but he gives him this alien technology that has an artificial intelligence inside of it and is able to do all sorts of stuff with it, including mind control like he did with Hawkeye. And that becomes a MacGuffin. So you've got these 2 items, the Tesseract and the staff, that end up really complicating things down the road for everybody.
In the scene where he comes out and he becomes Loki again in Germany, he tells everyone to bow for him, and one old man does not. And it's a great allusion to,
Nazi Germany, because the man is clearly Jewish.
Right. Yep. And then Cap arrives, and Cap mentions that the last time he was in Germany, he heard some guy talking like that, and it didn't turn out too well for him. Which just this whole movie alludes to Cap being out of time, like a man in a different time.
Yep.
He doesn't get some references. They make a joke when he finally understands one of the references.
Joke killed me. Evan's delivery on that is perfect. He goes, I understood that. I understood that reference.
And then you get that moment where Captain overtakes the PA system on the jet that they have, and Shoot to Thrill plays by AC/DC. He shows up into this battle. They take Loki. It's too easy. And then from that moment on, this movie is non-stop. It is go, 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 go. And the introduction of Thor, when Downey starts, kind of teasing Thor, like, does mother know you weareth her drapes?
For Shakespeare in the Park, yeah.
And they do a great job with playing up the fact that Iron Man is not a part of this team.
No.
He has chosen to be a one-man band.
Well, he was not accepted into the Avengers.
Right. Yeah, because he wasn't up to snuff. We found that out in Iron Man 2. It is just so much fun to watch him in this. And he's offended, right? He's offended that he's not invited to be a part of this team. It's even when he and Banner are trying to figure out what's going on with the
doing their Science Bros thing.
Which is so good.
So that's become a massive online meme, and actually a subculture now, where people have been making their own fan fiction and comic strips and art called Science Bros, which is about Tony Stark and Bruce Banner hanging out doing science stuff, and oftentimes the results are erotic, that they actually end up like forming a romantic relationship and becoming a couple in a lot of those things. And them finding a connection in their scientific brains was such a smart move to make, because most Marvel superheroes are sort of based on science in some way, meaning it's a scientist that did something, someone who's very smart that figured out how to make the power happen. So you've got these two really smart guys, and then you've got these two basically punchers, not idiots, but not nearly as sophisticated intellectually in Captain America and Thor. So it just balances it out so nicely.
Highlight moments in this movie include the Hulk trying to pick up Thor's hammer. That was so much fun.
He was not worthy.
Bruce Banner arriving on that moped.
Yep.
When he lands in that warehouse, scared the hell out of a couple pigeons.
Wait, well, his notion of that he's always angry, and that he, at the point it's not becoming angry, it's just letting the anger take over. I love that line. Ruffalo has said it gets quoted to him constantly. That people are always saying to him, I'm always angry. Also, Puny God, which is phenomenal.
Because, again, talk about something where it surprises you. He starts doing this monologue, and you're like, okay, so here's the monologue where he talks about being, like bigger, blah, blah, blah. And it's totally interrupted by him being treated like a ragdoll.
Yep.
There are, I can think of one thing off the top of my head that I would have changed. And that would have been the scene where they're all arguing in the lab on top of the helicarrier. They film it in this kind of drunk manner where they're kind of looking up and the camera's moving a little bit.
Because they're all being intoxicated by the staff.
Right.
Yeah.
And, Thor has, he gives some allusion to like, you're so petty, you're so small.
And tiny.
And I just, to me, that moment is, I would have rather have seen like the camera going around facing inside, looking out of this circle, that later on we get the shot of the outside looking in when they become a team again.
Got it.
So it's disjointed when they're not a team, but it is fluid and nice when they are a team.
Gotcha.
Favorite moments: that circle shot when they're in the Battle of New York, and the continuation shot where it follows like Hawkeye shooting the arrow. You follow the arrow, and then the Hulk goes by. So good. Yeah,
especially when you've got Hulk and Thor, who are the two strongest, both like just pummeling it out on top of that creature.
And Hulk takes the big piece of sheet metal, and then
they're all teaming up.
It's so good. It's so much fun to watch, and the stakes are so high.
Also,
because
maybe
this battle is taking place not on some remote planet or small New Mexico town. Right. It's the middle of New York City.
Yeah, the whole world is now being told there is a world out there, because most people don't know about Thor. Like, that's been a fairly contained story. S.H.I.E.L.D. has that covered. But now the whole world understands that there's such things as aliens and other civilizations, and that we think we're so advanced, but we're actually at the bottom of the bucket. Earth is often talked about in these movies as being definitely different than the other planets, in that the other planets we meet are always far more technologically advanced. They're more advanced civilizations, but they don't have heroes the way that Earth does. Earth is this particular planet that happens to have, it's got 3 Infinity Stones on it in New York. And it's sort of at the epicenter of that universe. Mm-hmm. So yeah, phenomenal movie. I was in pure heaven the entire time as a fanboy. I was smiling constantly. I've watched that movie over and over again. My only gripe about the movie is the aspect ratio they shot it in.
Oh,
yeah, they shot it in just like typical 16:9 aspect ratio versus almost all of the Marvel movies, with the exception of the first Ant-Man, I think, are shot in a much wider format. So when you edit the movies together, you have to account for the aspect ratio change, which makes you go, "Oh, damn it, Joss! Why did you decide to make this aspect ratio?"
Oh, that is a video boy's worst nightmare.
It is. It really, really is. But I'll get over it.
This also ends phase 1.
Ends phase 1 with probably my favorite post-credits sequence, which they shot like 3 or 4 days before the premiere. After the premiere.
You're talking about the shawarma sequence.
The shawarma sequence. They didn't shoot that until after the movie premiered, and then edited it in and put it in the movies after that. Mm-hmm. And it's so good because it's seeing heroes as human beings just being super fucking tired, or super tired. Sorry, I'll beep that out after if I remember.
Yeah.
After excuse me. Yeah. So
can you imagine what the sales of shawarma went after that?
I didn't know what shawarma was until that.
Have you had it since?
No.
Oh, we should go have some shawarma.
We should.
Yeah.
Also, Chris Evans had a beard at that time.
Yeah.
So they had to put a prosthetic on him, but the prosthetic looked so stupid that they had him then cover his face with his hand in that scene.
It's one of my favorite stories from that, because it's that post-credit scene that doesn't allude to anything else. It is just it's a payoff for you, right? And in fact, we'll touch on this as we get into it, but remind me when we do next podcast, the next one after this, to bring up the shawarma scene. Okay. So this ends phase 1, and we know that Thanos is there, and I think people thought, okay, so Thanos is phase 2. Nay.
Nope.
We have more building to do. We have so much more building to do. And they kick off phase 2 with Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3, which is kind of a thorn in a lot of people's sides.
Not mine, but a lot of people's sides.
Right. Sure. A lot of people had a big deal with this. So this Iron Man 3 is directed by Shane Black, who's one of my favorite writers and directors. He's the Lethal Weapon writer, and he did Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, another Robert Downey Jr. film, which is why I think he ended up getting this. He loves setting things around Christmas, and so that's why this happens to be set around Christmas. They take the concept of PTSD and ramp it up for Tony Stark. And that, I think, was such a strong choice, such an incredible choice for him to be dealing with, seeing the things that he's seen at this point. And we also now know that, okay, so billions and billions of dollars worth of damage from this alien insurgency. What is Tony Stark's life look like right now?
Right.
And we are introduced to the character of the Mandarin, who is played by Ben Kingsley in this. And they do a really good job, I think, setting up the Mandarin in this, like the idea that this is sort of like a Joker character from Dark Knight. He just wants to watch the world burn.
Well, so the Mandarin in the comics, like we said earlier, was a really sort of problematic, racist stereotype caricature but was also the biggest Iron Man villain. So how do you handle the issue then of bringing the biggest Iron Man villain to the screen without doing that? And what they ended up doing was making the Mandarin be a European terrorist who is the leader of the Ten Rings, which was introduced in Iron Man 1, which is a reference to the fact that the Mandarin character in the comics wears 10 rings on his hands. Each ring has a different power to it. So instead they make him, a charismatic terrorist, almost like a, what's the guy from the Waco, Texas guy, cult leader?
Yeah, I can't think of his name.
I can't remember his name, but he's like a cult leader. He's like a cult leader and like an Osama bin Laden mixed in with a European. And he chews the scenery so well that I can understand why some might be disappointed in that we didn't get a great scenery chewing villain, which is like what Joker is. But the scene when you find out that he's really just this washed up, drug addicted actor named Trevor was such an amazing twist, I think, that made sense and let us all know that we really don't know exactly what's going to be happening in these movies. And it made more sense than I think having just a guy. Like, this villain is not motivated by those terrorist things. He's actually motivated by getting drugs, getting drunk, having prostitutes over and just being taken care of.
This is the movie where I think it solidifies the fact that Tony Stark is continually paying for his attitude prior to Iron Man.
Yeah.
So Drew Pearce, who plays one of the villains in this, is introduced, and the movie starts in 1999, and you see Tony Stark totally blow off this guy, and isn't even nice to say like, "Hey, listen, I've got something else going on right here." Just like tricks him to going to the roof of this building,
like a mean kid at school,
like a mean kid. And you kind of maybe get the thought of like, is that why Justin Hammer hated him so much? Was they were rivals, and he probably was always like, even though he won, he gloated about the fact that he won, and so he himself is part of his own problem, is having to pay the penalty for being such a jerk this whole time through. And you also get something in this that was going to be a problem no matter what, which is, why don't you just call the other Avengers? Because if something's going down, shouldn't you just, where are the other Avengers? Yeah,
I mean, that comes up in the comics constantly too, because all these heroes have their own storylines. But you could argue that, well, the other Avengers are Thor is out in space because he is trying to mop up the mess that's out there. Or he's on Asgard, I should say. He took Loki and the Tesseract back there. Captain America is working for S.H.I.E.L.D. and is in the middle of trying to take down S.H.I.E.L.D. I don't think we really know where the Hulk is at this point.
Well, we do in the post-credit scene.
I don't remember. Oh,
he's chatting with Bruce, and Bruce keeps falling asleep during him telling about his story.
That's right.
So you have to kind of assume that Bruce is working with Tony at this point. He did take him up on the offer of like
their
the
friendship
R&D,
is there. Their friendship is there.
But I also think that it's pride, right?
Yeah.
So Tony Stark is a very prideful man. And the reason he doesn't call the other Avengers is he can take care of this himself. And so it even shows like when he takes off, and you kind of get an allusion to the first film because he has to rebuild his Iron Man suit. He's using the tools in that kid's garage and parts of his toys to rebuild the Iron Man suit and get it up and running again. To me, if I was I could watch Iron Man 1 over and over again, Iron Man 2 once every couple of years. I don't need to see Iron Man 3 that much. There's not a lot that goes into this that really character builds for me that much. And there certainly isn't a lot with like the villainry in this.
So this movie was interesting because Kevin Feige's intention was that the villain would be female. And there's this female sort of past fling that Tony Stark meets at the beginning in that flashback. And Marvel Studios' idea was that she would be the villain. That wouldn't be Killian Pierce. It would be her running the Extremist program, which is a comic book storyline. But at that time, Kevin Feige didn't have final say. He still reported to someone else. I forget the guy's name. The guy who ended up running Marvel Television for a while. Total jackass. And turned down the idea that they would have a female villain because he thought it would not sell action figures. And there was still this old Hollywood notion of there's a very particular way you do movies to make money, and you don't go outside of it, you don't take risks. And so eventually, and I don't know if it was around Ultron or when it happened, but eventually Feige was given a promotion that surpassed that guy. And Feige now reports directly to Bob Iger of Disney.
Well, and at this point too, we're also pretty much told that Joss Whedon is, even though if he's not directing it, he's the one who's kind of making calls as he's ushering in phase 2.
Right.
That he's the one who's kind of got the overall vision for what's taking place. No pun intended to the character.
Right. But he's also getting a ton of pushback. Like, he had to do a lot of battles.
Right.
And that's why when we get to it, there are problems with Ultron. But right now we're still on Iron Man 3.
Iron Man 3. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. It's Robert Downey Jr. Also at this time, I think we're starting to count the appearances of Nick Fury, because we know that Sam Jackson signed like a 13 picture deal.
Yeah,
and
massive deal.
We're like, oh God, does this credit scene count as like one of his picture deals?
Right. And the one thing that movie does too is it shows a thing that I really like is they show with every movie that time has passed and this hero has undergone some changes. In every Iron Man movie, we see the improvements that Tony has been making to the armor. So he's constantly making it better. So Iron Man 3 is the first time where he's automated the suit to fly at him in pieces, and he can build it that way. And then he's doing a lot of jumping in and out of suits in that last battle.
Yep.
That we're really getting that set up now that he's improved the armor and its flexibility and the things he can do with it more. And that makes sense that this character continues to improve.
I mean, in fact, does he say it's like this is Mach 17 at one point? Something like that?
Yeah.
And I love that when you get the shot of him looking at all of the, he's got the Mach 1, the thing he built in the desert.
Actually the only one that's made of iron.
Yep. All the way through. And so knowing that he is constantly improving the suit is also something I think that speaks to Tony Stark, which is not, he's a perfectionist, but Tony doesn't know how to stop.
Right.
He's always going to go.
It.
That is the perfect word, addicted.
Yeah, he's addicted to being a hero because it's given him a better high than anything he's had. But he also has this anxiety now because he understands that there is a vague threat on the horizon, and he, with all of his intellect, he's trying to figure out, how do I solve this problem? How do I invent my way out of that problem?
Iron Man 3 has one of the best scores of any Marvel movie as well, including the Can You Dig It credit song. I found myself like getting amped up, and I'm like, I wish they would have included this a little earlier in the movie. But I think because you've got a different look to this altogether.
Yeah.
It feels different.
I would say great movie for Pepper Potts.
Oh, great movie for Pepper Potts.
I love Pepper. I'm glad that she gets, temporary powers and gets to do some superhero stuff, which is pretty fantastic. And her superhero name in the comics is Rescue. So when she's in, which we'll see later on, when she's in, her superhero is Rescue. She's basically another Iron Man. And I love that about her. And Gwyneth Paltrow, for all of her weird stuff with goop and everything else in her life,
steamed vaginas.
Yeah, and at least we have Pepper Potts. And I'm going to tie this into Theater B really quick. I should have said this back in Iron Man 1. So years ago, we had this one of our ensemble members at Theater B. Her name was Emily, and she was the office manager. And was the most put together out of all of us, very professional, very responsible, very organized, very effective, right? She really kept things together. And at one point I realized that because she is a redhead with freckles, I said to her, you're kind of Pepper Potts, and Theater B is Iron Man, right? Theater B is great and it's got all this stuff, but without Pepper Potts, Theater B really can't function. So I started calling her Pepper, and that became her nickname. And then after she moved out of town with her husband, we got another Pepper. We got another person with reddish hair, and we've had a few Peppers since then. So that person typically gets that nickname Pepper from me.
Interesting. Okay, well, that's good. Let's segue into something that's not so good. Thor: The Dark World.
This is one that we'll maybe not spend too much time on. This is another stinker.
Thor: The Dark World. I will say the best thing that came out of this is they walked away saying, we haven't figured out Thor yet.
Yeah.
We thought this is the perfect way to do it.
Surprisingly enough, the same people who wrote Infinity War and Endgame, and I think Civil War, wrote The Dark World.
Yep. It opens up more characters that we haven't seen before. It brings aliens to Earth again.
Yeah, the Dark
we get
Elves.
More Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman gets a chance to be in Asgard as well as on Earth, and
or as Odin pronounces it, Asgard.
Asgard. The one, I think, saving grace of this movie to me is when when they have the funeral for Thor's mother. I think that is a very touching moment, and you see how steeped they are in tradition.
Yep.
That is a huge aspect, the tradition part of it. And Loki is in a prison on Asgard, and everything looks fine, and then you find out that he's just projecting this look of fine, and he is torn apart this place because he's lost his mother as well.
Some of Loki's best moments are in the Dark World. So you could cut out a bunch of the Dark World and just keep the Thor and Loki stuff and have a good movie. And
I think the only thing that we need to know from this is that at one point the ether is inside of Jane Foster.
Right. And the ether is it is another Infinity Stone. It's the Reality Stone. Each of the stones have their own unique properties, and with the ether, it doesn't maintain the shape of a stone constantly. It usually maintains this other shape. And, all of these other objects like the Tesseract and the sphere that holds the Power Stone and Loki's scepter, they show that these gems can be used as a powering device. You can put it at the center of another piece of technology. And so I've always thought of the ether as a piece of alien technology that the stone is sort of inside somehow.
Interesting.
But the way that Thor eventually explains it is he says, no, it's just this goopy thing, but then it can solidify itself into the stone, into its true form when it needs to.
Post-credit scenes in this one include the introduction of Guardians of the Galaxy, essentially, because they go to the Collector.
Oh yeah,
they drop the ether off with the Collector to keep it safe amongst his collection. You see Benicio del Toro in this
an
role.
Amazing casting choice.
Oh, so good.
Amazing casting choice.
It's too bad that he was so good in this, because then they're like, well, let's put him in Star Wars. Wah, wah, wah.
Not to make this a Star Wars podcast, I would say he's one of the few highlights of The Last Jedi.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But let's not get into it. Yeah. That's a whole other thing.
They needn't have bothered, in my opinion. You also get another post-credit sequence where Thor just appears on Earth and Jane embraces him to think like, okay, so they're going to have a relationship on Earth? What's the deal?
And then she slaps him.
Thor: The Dark World does lead to a small web appearance of Chris Hemsworth in this funny thing of like, Thor has to get a roommate.
Yep.
And my personal opinion is they were like, oh shit, this guy's pretty funny.
Exactly.
This is a great idea. And then that is what influences the rest of what Thor becomes. And thank God.
Right.
Because after this movie, I don't think any of us are really beating down the door for another Thor movie.
No, we were not. And I love Thor, and I love Norse mythology.
And I love Chris Hemsworth.
He's amazing, and I love Loki and all that stuff. But yeah, the first two movies, they just didn't. They were not good.
In probably one of the smallest windows that we see in the MCU, Thor: The Dark World comes out in November, and then in April we get Captain America: The Winter Soldier, which
from
rocks.
Worst to one of the best of all time. And Captain America: Winter Soldier is often, if you ask some of the diehard fans, that will be in their top 5 Marvel movies, if not the top spot. And I had a lot of those conversations with my fellow nerds pre-Endgame and Infinity War. But that's led to a term that gets used in the fandom now called Captain America got Russo'd, that was the first movie that the Russo brothers came in and started working on. And they were able to imbue his character and take him in such a new direction that they took this older character that was already really good, but they made a far superior version of him with it. And that is the movie that Captain America truly comes alive. And who could forget that amazing action sequence at the beginning on the Lemurian Star, which is a shield ship that has been hijacked by pirates, and he's in his covert outfit, and you get the sense that he's really learned fighting styles, and he's really come into his own. He's been training because he's like kicking guys in the chest and they like fly off the ship, and he really comes into his own. I love that sequence so much.
I think to me the Winter Soldier is great because it lets us know that anything you assume is ridiculous. You know, you assume Bucky's dead. You saw Bucky fall off of that train.
Unless you were a fan from the comics and you realized he eventually came back.
And I think to me that is what I bring to this conversation, right?
Absolutely.
I didn't read any of this, so this was news to me.
That's why these movies work.
It is why I agree. Yep. Because they're fan servicing you with lines that I don't know anything about that I come to appreciate later on, but they're also fan servicing me with telling me a story without saying, well, we're going to assume that you know this.
Yep.
We're going to assume that you know that.
These movies realize how rich the source material is.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of trying to make their own cool version of it, they really find the things that make the most sense from a storytelling perspective, and they throw it in the mix. And anything you can do to get your heroes back on their heels.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the most emotionally vulnerable part of Captain America is his relationship with Bucky, and that he lost his best friend, the only person who ever stood up for Steve when he was a weakling. So their friendship and relationship pays dividends down the line. That whole setup is so good.
This is also where we meet Sam.
Yep.
This is where we get to
Sam Wilson, the Falcon, who was often a team up partner of Captain in the comics. They had their own miniseries where they would team up, and in the comics, Falcon was actually somewhat of a lame character. These comics, when they originated, they're very much a reflection of their time, where all of the main superheroes are typically white men, and then a few white women, and there are very few characters of color. And Falcon being one of the first ones that really gained much prominence, but he was always sort of second fiddle. He always had a lame costume. He didn't really have a massive fan base, but thank God they put Sam Wilson in this movie and put, I'm sorry, what's his name?
The guy, are you looking
name.
for the guy who played Sam Wilson?
Yep. I'm just blanking on his name at the moment.
Anthony Mackie.
He is so good, and the friendship that him and Captain America spark is killer.
Mm-hmm.
I love that Captain is able to finally relate to someone because they have military experience too.
Yep. Great introduction to him too, with him running on your left, on your left, on your left. And you see Captain's little book of things he needs to figure out, you know, the references and stuff like that he needs to see. You also get a sad little scene here with Peggy Carter where she's suffering from dementia.
Yeah.
And, you know, you see a still young Steve Rogers wanting to connect with his past and not being able to.
Yeah.
And then, so to me, that's why it's such a big deal that Bucky is still alive. No wonder he's so adamant about seeing Bucky. Not only were they great friends, but it's somebody who actually understands the exact same thing he's going through.
The one tie to his past that he has. I love that scene with Peggy Carter for a number of reasons that you've just mentioned, but also one of my biggest gripes with movies and TV in general is when they apply age makeup to an actor, and no one has been able to do it well enough just with physical effects, in my opinion, that ever makes sense. You can always tell that the person is covered in latex and there's no life to the face. So in that one, they instead did CG. And while you can still definitely tell that it's a CG and that it's not real, and you can see some like lines that don't make sense, it took me out of the movie far less. It looked far closer to an aged person.
Yep.
And Haley Atwell didn't have to speak through prosthetics, didn't have to have mush mouth from that. And it was so much more effective. And that's where you see that Marvel was experimenting and pushing the technology forward, because that same technology goes into the age reduction later on of other characters.
I was going to say that same thing.
And once we get to Endgame, I think they've taken the aging technology to a whole new level, where even though you can tell it's CG, it's far more advanced than what you get in Winter Soldier.
Mm-hmm.
It takes me out of the movie far less. You know, you know that you're not looking at something real, but it's so much closer to it. And and Haley Atwell's performance is so good in that scene.
Yep. I agree.
So good in that scene when she like her dementia kicks in at the end, and then she realizes that he's there again.
Oh, God, it breaks your heart, doesn't it? It just breaks your heart.
Great Nick Fury movie too. You get Nick Fury's real big first action sequence when he's in that shield vehicle and he gets attacked by Hydra. You want to see my lease?
You get two post-credit scenes here. One, the one further on is Bucky, or it's essentially the Winter Soldier, looking at the Bucky area of the Captain America exhibit at the Smithsonian.
Which is an amazing way that they give plot exposition at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
Also, I don't know if there's a better hand-to-hand combat scene than when Captain America first fights the Winter Soldier in the streets.
Yeah.
Right before he gets Bucky's mask off. Yep. That is such a masterful scene.
It's so good. The hand-to-hand, here's one thing I really like. So Iron Man fires his blasters, Thor throws his hammer, Hulk just kind of plows through people. Captain America does hand-to-hand combat, you know, and you mentioned the shield being a defensive weapon too. I really find that to be engaging to me, is being able to watch these things back and forth and watching people get knocked down and have to get back up.
He finds so many more uses for the shield as well. When he first is running after the Winter Soldier, after he tries to assassinate Nick Fury, he's he's trying to get through this office building. And at one point he knows that the turn he needs to make is so tight, he can't just make it. So he just lets the shield absorb the impact on the wall to redirect him. And, the different ways that him and Bucky are like trading the shield back and forth as they're fighting, and so good. So good.
The other post-credit sequence that we see first is it's kind of a layup to Avengers Age of Ultron, where you're being taken through this facility where the scepter is being studied.
Yeah.
And you get introduced to the Scarlet Witch and whatever they decide to call Quicksilver, other than Quicksilver, because
they don't give him the name. He's still Quicksilver, but they just call him Pietro, which is his first name.
Right.
They don't even call her the Scarlet Witch.
But they can't call him Quicksilver, is my understanding, even in Avengers Age of Ultron, because the Quicksilver character is technically still under the X-Men guys, which is why he appears in X-Men and they refer to him as Quicksilver. And this is the first time that I think we see really the battle of ownership properties, because 20th Century Fox decides to include the Quicksilver character, the son of Magneto.
Yeah, they're both the children of Magneto.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, because in the X-Men movies, you see a young Wanda Maximoff. She just doesn't have any powers.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so
because they call them the twins.
Yep,
they call them the twins.
They've always been twins. They've always been the children of Magneto.
So
they were originally villains in the comic books.
I think that they wanted to work out a deal here, but 20th Century Fox essentially put a middle finger up and said, "We're gonna X-Men is ours. We bought it. We're gonna keep doing stuff." And at this point, they're dealing with their X-Men time capsule pieces. So Days of Futures Past, X-Men, what was the first X-Men, whatever the first one was? I can't think of the name of it. What was the first X-Men movie that they set in the past with like James
First
McAvoy?
Class.
First Class. Thank you. First Class. And so I think this is the first part where we see that Marvel is, at this point maybe pushing Disney, being like, "Hey, listen, we'd like to have all of our toys back."
Mm-hmm. My understanding of it is a bit different, but I could definitely be wrong. I don't know for certain. My understanding is that the agreement, the terms of the agreement, were that there would be characters that they both had rights to, but they would be limited to how they could use them. So because they call him Quicksilver in the promotional materials, he's referred to as Quicksilver in all the promotions for Ultron. The name doesn't get used, but they get referred to as miracles instead of mutants. And now that Disney owns all those characters again, my prediction I'm going to make for the future is when they introduce mutants, they're going to find out that Wanda is a mutant, and that what the experiments with Loki's staff did was it woke up the mutant X factor in her.
Okay.
And that would have been the same thing with Quicksilver, that the reason that the other test subjects didn't survive was because they weren't mutants. And that what it did was it activated that gene, but they haven't read that in yet. They're called miracles instead of mutants.
Right, because they can't use the word mutant.
They can't use the word mutant. They cannot be the children of Magneto, but they can be called the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, I believe. But it made sense that they would then kill off Quicksilver because he was already so popular on the X-Men side of it. They did a really great version of him, like the one standout good thing about those movies.
All right, and then next up is the best soundtrack of any movie out there, Guardians of the Galaxy.
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Guardians of the Volume 1. I knew nothing about the Guardians going into this, other than the fact that like the raccoon's one of them. I think people didn't know what to expect from this, and this ushers in a new style of filmmaking for Marvel that they kind of latch on to a little bit. This super action, but also funny and just kind of an adventure romp. This is the opposite of Thor: The Dark World.
Yeah.
The absolute opposite. And you also get the chance to introduce an entirely new cast of characters. And in this time, there's already, let's get the team together.
Right.
But you find out there's another team. Yeah. So where you get in future Guardians movies, you know that there's going to be this team in place, whereas you've still got to wait for another Avengers movie when you're going to see the whole crew back together.
Right. So the Guardians of the Galaxy have been a group in the comics for quite some time, but they were always fifth or sixth tier. Like I barely knew anything about them growing up, and they always had changing lineups. So the lineup that are in this movie is not really typically what the lineup usually was. At one point, Rocket was there. At one point, Groot was there, but there wasn't like the sort of classic Guardians of the Galaxy that you would want to copy. And Feige's motivation for that was they wanted to try to make a franchise in their universe that was not an established character, so that everyone was coming at it with fresh eyes. And then it also gives them the ability to flesh out the fact that there's this whole universe teeming with life out there that will affect our world that we haven't had a chance to see yet. So even though we know Thor and Asgard is from outer space,
we've seen just a smattering of other worlds.
Just a teeny bit. There's always been this hint that space would come into it. Even early on in the first Iron Man, they talk about improvements necessary to go into space later on if you ever want to do that. And so, yeah, with Guardians, it's a fresh start. When I first saw this movie, I liked it, but it didn't bowl me over because while it was enjoyable and funny, it wasn't a funny that made me laugh really hard. I never felt just like knocked out of my seat like I have by other stuff, but I liked it a lot. I was really happy they made it. And my favorite part of it was Rocket Raccoon, who's just awesome. Just this fact that you have a raccoon as one of the characters walking around is pretty great.
Groot, I think, was the toy dream of any Marvel movie, which is we can do so much with this.
Yeah, especially Baby Groot.
Baby Groot, during the post-credit sequence, when you see him doing his little dance in the pot, it reminded me of everybody in the early 90s had one of those things the flower that would dance.
Right. It's a movie, too, that it speaks a lot to a generation older than you or I, because James Gunn grew up in the same generation that our good friend Greg Carlson did. And so Greg, who his family, they're all very big Guardians of the Galaxy fans, and it's one of his favorite movies from the MCU. Guardians 2 is, but he feels a kinship with Gunn and with a lot of the stylistic choices in it that he feels are reminiscent of other movies. I can't see it, but I think that might have more to do with the generation I'm from. And where I come at these movies from is from a fanboy since childhood who's interested in the characters that I never thought I'd get to see. But this movie did a couple of things that I loved. One, it introduces Thanos for the first time. The very first shot of Thanos we get is fantastic. Second, you're right. It brings an amount of levity and humor that we haven't seen before in a tone of humor. When we get to Thor Ragnarok, I'll talk about this a bit. I'm actually one of the few people that I disagree with the notion that Thor Ragnarok only comes after you get Guardians, because I actually think that there's little to no connective tissue in the stylings there, but I'm definitely in the minority amongst the fan base along that. But yeah, and then the music soundtrack, you have a space opera, and then you've got, 70s soul music playing behind it. And good for Chris Pratt for becoming an A-list celebrity after being fat, pudgy Andy Dwyer on Parks and Rec. You never would have looked at Andy Dwyer and thought, oh, they're going to get him in really buff shape and he's going to be a superhero. But I can't imagine another actor having that role, being able to do it the way Pratt does.
And they take you to worlds with alien beings and species that feel real. Like when they're in the jail, I feel like it's real, and everyone's kind of talking with each other.
This guy here is our booty.
I do. So you mentioned this is the first like look, we get at Thanos. We get it at the end of Avengers, but it's just that turn and smile.
Yeah.
This is where I think we see
the Josh Brolin Thanos.
Yes, exactly. Which is interesting because you'd think like, oh yeah, these guys have got this figured out for the next like 23 movies. They don't. And if you watch these things back to back, they're making some stuff up. Like you said, Kevin Feige talking about, well, we didn't really know where we wanted to go until we went. Guardians becomes one of the most successful Marvel movies.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Just it makes money, leading into the fact that like, okay, we know we're going to lean into Guardians and whatever Guardians is doing. So it's got toys. The cast are all relatively unknowns. So you get them at just market rate, I imagine.
I mean, probably the most famous person in the movie is Vin Diesel, who just said "I am Groot" a bunch of times. And Bradley Cooper did the voice of Rocket, but after that, Dave Bautista was a professional wrestler. Zoe Saldana had done Star Trek and a few other stuff, and she's phenomenal.
But she wasn't giving a lot of leading roles. No, sure.
She wasn't A-list at all. No question. None of them were A-list.
Karen Gillan, who plays Nebula.
Oh yeah.
She goes on to be in Jumanji, amongst other things. Who's unrecognizable in that makeup effect.
Actually, you know what? The more famous people were side characters, like John C. Reilly playing a member of the Nova Corps.
Glenn Close. Benicio del Toro.
Yep, as the Collector. I'm trying to remember Tenola. Oh, how does she? I'm forgetting his actual full name. Who it's never revealed directly in the movies, but they've said it in other stuff. Is he is the brother of the Grandmaster? They're brothers.
Really?
They're from the same race of people. They both have similar blue stripes going down their chin. They're both as ancient as the other. And I thought that we might get some of that in later movies. We haven't seen more connective tissue, but it's been confirmed by the actors and by Kevin Feige that they're brothers.
Interesting. Guardians wraps up with the dancing Groot post-credit scene, which is part of the opening of Guardians 2 with that same thing. He freezes. For whatever reason, it's like he doesn't want to show Drax that he's alive or that he can dance. And then you get the Collector scene, and you get one of the biggest payoffs to Marvel fans at the end of this during the Collector scene, because you get Howard the Duck saying gross.
Right.
Which you find out that there's a lot of people out there who are interested in Howard the Duck.
Oh, yeah.
And so knowing what we know now, Disney Plus is going to have this whole slate of new Marvel shows. Kevin Smith getting to take on Howard the Duck as part of a series. I believe Howard the Duck is the first like Marvel movie of the modern era. I think it was 1980, 1981. Something. And I remember reading a thing where they thought like, yep, at that point we were just, if anyone wanted to buy something for us, sure, because comics were not making money like they are today.
No.
And
I mean, even today they're not really.
But they figured out like there's bed sheets and there's all these, all these things that like funnel money into the Marvel engine.
I shouldn't say they're not making money, but yeah, the markup on you don't really get the money from the comics as much as, you're right, the franchise itself, the marketing, the merchandise. In Guardians, I think the weakest link in Guardians is Ronan, who's the villain.
Oh,
he's another bland, uninteresting Marvel villain who is a Kree warrior. And
he also looks almost exactly the same as Apocalypse in X-Men Age of Apocalypse. So it's like
the bad makeup.
Yeah, I found that to be a villain I just didn't care about. I cared more about Dave Bautista wanting to kill him for what he did to his family.
Well, he wanted to kill Thanos.
Well, he wants to kill Ronan first. He wants to kill Ronan, and then it's Gamora who's like, well, it was Thanos who told Ronan to kill your family.
Oh, I didn't.
Well, then I'll kill Thanos.
Oh, I don't remember that. I thought Ronan didn't have anything to do with the death of his kids, but he did.
Yeah, if you remember, there's the scene where Batista confronts Ronan on that planet. And like they're like, no, wait. And he's like, no, I'm here to avenge my family.
Okay.
And he goes after, and he's kind of like drunk at that point.
Okay.
And then Rocket's like, you idiot, if you just would have waited.
Got it. Okay.
So
okay.
It's funny because they give him a reason to want to continue on. And even like now that Thanos, his storyline is taking place, are we going to lose Dave Bautista? Does he not have any,
right?
Now that if he's avenged his family, does that mean anything to him anymore?
Right.
And what Dave Bautista does is one of the best casting choices ever. And I don't know if they got lucky or if he had an audition that was really good, but he plays Drax perfectly.
I would assume it would be an audition because he wasn't a big enough star to just cast just by the stardom. But yeah, I know he's able to find a humor type with Drax, since Drax is from a species of people who don't use metaphor. They speak literally entirely. And so he can't understand a lot of the Earth phrases that Peter Quill, Star-Lord, is making. And I love Drax. The one thing I wish we would get would be an amazing killer Drax action sequence, because you never really get any action sequences with him that really sort of transcend and get exciting. He's more of a doofus who has the ability to, he's very durable, he's very strong, he's very fast and agile, he's a great warrior, but you never really see Drax cut loose. And that's something I've always wanted to see, is Drax really just get that Black Widow moment where he takes on a whole room full of people and knocks them down. But the scene with Ronan and Thanos is my favorite scene of the movie, because Josh Brolin proves right there that he's just gonna murder it with Thanos. He's gonna be amazing. And when he has that line about "come back to me empty-handed and I will bathe the starways with your blood," it's just so good. So good.
As far as pop culture too, this song brought, or this movie, obviously the soundtrack. The soundtrack hits number one almost immediately.
Yep.
And it's just essentially a mixtape.
Yep.
This also has one of the strongest scores, I think. What Alan Silvestri does with the Avengers theme is what happens in Guardians of the Galaxy. The theme here is strong and it's got an epic feeling to it.
Right.
I really, really like it a lot. Leading up to Avengers Age of Ultron. Now, I find it interesting that Guardians of the Galaxy opens and then the next movie is Avengers Age of Ultron, because we kind of we're like, yeah, we want to see, everyone's like, more Guardians. And you're not going to get that.
Well, they were producing them simultaneously, so they just wouldn't have been able to produce the Guardians that fast. They were already making the Avengers sequel.
Right. But I mean, that's the thing is, I think audiences were let down because they've got, and feasibly it's not possible, but you still have, I would say, one of the most popular stories in the MCU, because Guardians of the Galaxy appeals to people who haven't seen any of the other Marvel movies. Like you said, they wanted to create something that was new and fresh. And because of that, they had to take my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law went and saw Guardians of the Galaxy, I think twice.
Nice.
I don't remember her seeing Iron Man. I don't remember her seeing those other ones.
We're getting new Marvel fans every year. I love that.
And I think that there was a certain amount of people who were excited because they're like, oh, it's another one of those Marvel movies. And they wanted the Guardians. Guardians don't appear in Age of Ultron. As you said, that movie kind of got stuck in, and that was an experiment. And I think, I don't know.
You're talking about Guardians.
Yep. I don't know if Marvel thought that Guardians was going to make it or not.
Yeah, they were rolling the dice, just like they did with Iron Man.
And
they were rolling the dice.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda. Maybe you would have had a little illusion or something like that in Age of Ultron. I don't know where it's going to fit.
Yeah.
Full disclosure, I think Age of Ultron is my least favorite of everything.
Even less than Dark World and Incredible Hulk.
Yeah,
that is folly for sure.
So I'll tell you why. I just didn't find it to be very entertaining through the whole thing. And putting it next to that first Avengers movie, which I think is, it sets the bar incredibly high for team up superhero movies.
Right.
I don't get that from this. I was not bored, but I didn't feel engaged. I didn't feel full of, into it. I've only seen this one twice. The day I saw it in theaters, which was a doubleheader of Avengers and then Age of Ultron, and then once more when I watched it on Netflix. And both times I found myself disengaged from the storyline. I loved everything leading up to Ultron. The I've got no strings on me trailer for it, I thought was great. I love James Spader's voice. I was excited that Andy Serkis was going to be a part of it. But when it boiled down to it, I just did not get into this one at all.
So yeah, Ultron definitely has a very strong coterie of critics, and I think rightly so. Even though I am a very big Ultron fan, I love Age of Ultron. It's one of my favorite Marvel movies because it speaks to my core fandom, where I come from. It is the comic books come to life, and Ultron was the next obvious villain for the Avengers to fight. So, because I was glad they didn't go straight to Thanos. That wouldn't have made any sense to me. But with my big fandom of the movie, I'm able to look at the movie objectively, I feel, and go, yeah, this movie has definite flaws. It has that feel of too many cooks in the kitchen. Too many people were squabbling. We kind of got stories of it after the fact that Whedon got into a lot of battles with the studio during the making of that movie. And that it definitely suffers from characters that get left out, like Thor. He doesn't really have an arc at all. Whedon never really knew how to write for Thor. There's a lot of plot elements, a lot of editing that gets cut really, really quickly to try to make the runtime. So certain things that just don't make sense or don't land with the way you want it to land. But as a fan of these characters since I was 5, I was again even more giddy watching that movie than I was Avengers. And the biggest, most acrimonious arguments I've gotten in with my fellow Avengers fanatics and comic book fanatics is over the villain himself, Ultron. In that, because he doesn't, in the tradition of Marvel villains that don't have rock solid motivation, he is along those lines in that you can't quite tell where he's coming from, but it makes sense to me in the larger sense of the whole universe because he is an artificial intelligence that was either invented by Thanos' scientists or from an ancient weapon because he already exists. Ultron, the villain, is already there inside the scepter. Tony Stark doesn't invent a villain. So there's this entity that's in there that doesn't have any emotional capacity, is an unreliable narrator, and is thrust into superintelligence within a moment and cannot understand what it means to actually save the world. And he actually has a lot to do with how artificial intelligence affects our lives right now. Because once we do experience that, which I think we will in our lifetime, some sort of intelligence explosion, we have no way of controlling what happens after the fact. And the folly of Tony Stark is jumping into something he didn't quite understand because he was so desperate to protect the world from what he didn't know was coming.
Okay.
And so I really love James Spader's performance. I really love the look of Ultron. But with the caveat that, the movie has a lot of problems and it's not nearly as solid as what the Russos did and what comes after it. So I can understand completely how this is not a movie for everyone. You're right. It's not as cleanly made as the first Avengers. It doesn't hold a candle compared to Infinity War and Endgame or Captain America Civil War or Winter Soldier. But for me as a fanboy, I got a ton out of it. It's the first superhero team up movie where the movie starts and the team is there. They're in costume. They're already a team. They're operating as a team across the globe. They're fighting supervillains. So like basically the era between the end of Avengers and the end of Civil War is the realm where the comics I read existed. So that's where you're getting like the serialized, they're living an everyday life as superheroes. And you get some amazing scenes in Ultron, which end up paying dividends in Endgame, specifically the Mjolnir lifting scene. And I won't go too into it right now, but I really...
for those of you who maybe haven't seen it or need a refresher, they have a party. They have a cocktail party
because they think they've won, right? Yep. They've gotten Loki's scepter, which was being run all over the globe by Hydra, causing all sorts of problems, and they were experimenting with it, trying to make weapons out of it because all these different devices that are powered by Infinity Stones have secondary properties where they can imbue people with stuff.
And so they have this big party, and one of the things they do at this party is a montage of everyone trying to pick up Thor's hammer, and Cap
nudges it a little bit. No one else is able to get it. And the hint there is that Captain America is probably the most worthy out of all of them. So worthy that he can at least budge the hammer a little bit. But it's an important setup for Ultron, that movie itself, because it reinforces the notion that there is this magic spell on Mjolnir, which is you have to be quote unquote worthy in the eyes of the hammer to possess the power of Thor. So people can't pick up the hammer if you're not Thor. Hulk can't pick it up. No one can pick it up. Quicksilver can't pick it up when he tries to do it. So that has an important payoff later. Ultron also gives us more classic Avengers characters: Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, and the Vision. And the Vision was the thing I was the most excited over because he was always one of my favorite Avengers growing up. He never had his own title. He was always just in the books. And he had this cool design. And in the comic books, he is actually the repurposed android of the initial Human Torch. Before the Human Torch was a Fantastic Four, he was an android during the Captain America era and the Namor era. And so that android gets decommissioned, and then the Avengers reinvent him into the Vision. And we talked about how fortuitous it was that they decided to have Paul Bettany play the voice of Jarvis, because he is the perfect casting choice for Vision. He knocks Vision out of the effing park as a fan of those books. So I could continue to go on, but Ultron, definitely a flawed movie, not for everyone. Doesn't always hold up on repeat viewings, but for me as a core fan, it hits me in all my sweet spots.
I think, Ultron is the thing that people forget the most when they're naming all of the Marvel movies.
Because it's not as satisfying as Avengers or Infinity War or Endgame.
And I mean, even it took its licks by the critics too. It's the lowest rated of the Avengers movies.
Right.
Not by much. I mean, it still gets high praises, but it's not
still certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, but it's not in the 90s.
No.
Like the other ones.
I think it's in the upper 70s.
It's 75.
75?
Middle of the ground, 75.
There you go.
But I do think that this is a movie that does benefit from what comes after it, making you want to watch this a little bit more and be like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. I also think that, I know that this is probably service to the fanboys, but like that red hot dog skin that they put on Vision, I would have really rethought that out a little bit and said, maybe we'll change a little bit more. And they must have at one point thought like, yeah, we got to do something, because they start showing Vision with like, with the human skin tone and everything like that, rather than just the
human skin tone doesn't come into it until Infinity War. He's always Vision.
Is it Infinity War where he's cooking with Wanda?
Nope, that's Civil War, and he's dressed in human clothing.
Oh,
he hasn't changed his look, and that's a comic reference because he's trying to assimilate more into human culture. He's trying to be more human because he's in love with Wanda. So he doesn't. He hasn't advanced enough yet to project an illusion of himself that makes him look human. I was happy as a fan that they didn't do he looks like that in the comics, but let's do our cool Hollywood version of it. I'm glad that they decided to stay faithful to it. What amazes me though is that if you watch like the special features on that movie, how much is not actually there in the shooting, that they're actually doing a ton of CG work on Vision to make him look more synthetic. So like there's like ear bulges that they have to flatten out, and the painting on Paul Bettany is just the color. They're not putting any of the technical stuff. That's all being added after the fact. And but I can see your point for sure. It's not a typical choice you would do for an android. You do like a cooler cover, like silver or some other thing.
And they don't want to do the same thing that they're doing with Ultron, right? Right. They're making Ultron have this look. And I also think like the design on Ultron could have used a couple more passes, because I think he looks like something out of Battlestar Galactica.
He looks like the Ultron from the comics.
Right.
He's a very faithful rendition.
And that's the thing is, to me, the word faithful is tough, because if we're just trying to create exactly what was created in the comics, what's almost the point of putting this into a new medium? I think there needs to be some changes. Now, not changes just for change's sake, but you need to be able to, you're adapting the story. No matter what, this is an adaptation.
Right.
It's not, you're not just putting one thing into another. There are those changes that people make. And so to me, I obviously don't know when they do make tweaks and changes, But if they do, I'm fine. I'm way fine with it. Those are a couple of things that just stood out to me. Now, see, I think it's interesting because those are great to you. And to me, they're more like, no, thank you. Not so much.
Well, when something is as massively popular as this, when it reaches a mass audience, you're going to get every opinion under the sun. But it's all interesting to me. And
I think it's probably also a little bit easier to sell graphic novels to people who already know what this thing looks like, right? So if they were to change the look of Ultron in the movie and then try and get people to go back and buy a reissue of, that series, and Ultron looks different, we're very fickle people. We're like, well, that's not my Ultron.
Right. Yeah. I think you could kind of go in any which way, but the Marvel movies are a series of choices where you go, at what point are we faithful and at what point do we adapt? And I think they've been really good at doing that. And I think what they did was they adapted Vision. They did make tons of adaptations to Vision, his origin story, where he comes from, what he's able to do. And they still were able to give me the sense of the classic Vision and being a core member of the Avengers who's super important.
The post-credit scene here is just Thanos holding up his Infinity Gauntlet, being like, I'm going to take care of this myself.
Right. And that's actually caused a lot of confusion because there's no strong connective tissue in the storyline to say that Ultron is acting as an agent of Thanos. I don't think he is. That gives the impression that he is. And in a later interview with, I believe, the Russo brothers, they talk about how the reason that they believe the reason that Easter egg went in there was they wanted to remind the audience that there's this other villain on the horizon, but that in actuality that it would be better served to have that Easter egg after Guardians of the Galaxy, because you've got Ronan trying to act as an emissary of Thanos. So we've seen Loki do it. We've seen Ronan do it. You could make an argument that Ultron may have been a plan B or C, that if Loki can't do it, the scepter will be on Earth and we'll find this way for this guy to do it. But that connective tissue is never drawn. So I think it makes more sense to have that Easter egg after Guardians. And that's when he is on the name of the planet that we will come to in Infinity War, where he gets the gauntlet. So yeah, kind of a weird spot to put it. Caused a lot of confusion amongst fans.
It's not even technically a planet, right? It's like a
the star.
It's where they're using.
I can't pronounce that at the moment, but yeah.
I always want to say nowhere, but that's not. That's the inside the skull of an ancient being.
That's
right?
where the Collector lives.
That's where the Collector lives.
He's in nowhere.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so Age of Ultron opens May 1st. May 17th, we get Ant-Man.
Oh, wow, those are the same month?
It's 2 months apart. May 1st and then July 17th.
Oh, I thought you said May 7th or May 17th just now.
No, I'm sorry. If I did, it's 2 months later.
Got it.
Ant-Man, which has one of the most, oh my God, what's going on behind the scenes productions of any one of these movies.
Yeah.
They went through directors, they went through writers, everything about this movie was being scrutinized.
This was one of their first movies in development. They were developing this movie back during Iron Man.
They've got a character here who is, again, a lesser known character. And so I think at this point, Marvel says, well, Marvel doesn't need anything. They've got all my money. And at this point too, we also know every Marvel movie is going to open huge.
Yeah.
Because even if
the brand is massive,
even if the movie is a piece of garbage, it's going to make a ton of money. But I think they also are saying we would like more people to buy toys. We would like more people to fall in love with a new character. My understanding with Age of Ultron is the Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch toys didn't sell very well.
Okay.
And that is a huge aspect of this arm is the merchandising.
That's where most of the money comes from.
And so for this, we're really pushing the fact that Ant-Man is supposed to be a part of what's going on. It's also the end of phase 2.
Yeah.
So Age of Ultron takes place and then this takes place
sort of at the same time.
Yeah.
But shortly after, because Hank Pym references Sokovia.
Right.
So he references those morons in Sokovia because he hates Tony. He hates the Stark family.
Right. And there's also, there's a great moment. They're like, well, what should we do? Let's call the Avengers.
Yeah.
And that's where I love that. I love the fact that this movie is about the creation of a new hero, but it also references the fact that they know these things and they've seen it. In Captain America, Winter Soldier, the fact that there's a Smithsonian wing dedicated to Captain America. Yeah. These are things that I like the idea of that, for Batman, no one ever actually knows if Batman's real or not. It's this, this thing in the shadows. I don't know.
Or at least you never get the sense of the effect on the world Batman has been having.
Right.
Whereas you see that almost all of these Marvel superheroes don't have secret identities. They live public lives. Mm-hmm. They're celebrities. They're superheroes. They've got comics being written about them. And so they don't have what Spider-Man does have, which is a secret identity that he has to protect, what Batman and Superman have. Ant-Man's a good movie. It also, to me, is like Guardians 1 in that I like it, but it doesn't really floor me. It has a lot of good stuff, but thank goodness we got Paul Rudd.
Yep.
Paul Rudd breathes some new life into the Marvel Cinematic Universe with sort of a comedic style that I think only he can do that well.
To me, he represents the everyman.
Right.
Tony Stark, billionaire playboy. I can't identify with that.
Even though he's still brilliant.
Yep.
In his own way. He's a mechanical engineer.
Yep.
Who's also a cat burglar.
Yeah, he's a thief.
Yeah.
But to me, he's more like us, right? So even when he's trying to explain something, he doesn't have the words for what he's trying to explain, or, oh my God, there's a villain here. You get the Avengers.
Right.
He is thinking exactly what everyone in the audience is thinking and experiencing through this whole thing. And he gets pulled into this in an interesting way. I don't think that they fully use Paul Rudd to the best of his abilities in Ant-Man, because I think there's a lot of studio interference here, and we get much better versions of Scott Lang in Civil War and even Ant-Man and the Wasp.
Yeah. So originally it was Edgar Wright who is going to be the director for Ant-Man, who is one of the most, he's one of the most brilliant comedic directors out there. He knows how to direct comedy in ways that no one else really seems to grasp. And of all the rumors that we've all heard, it seems that he was clashing with the house style of Marvel Studios in that they hadn't quite established how directors fit into the larger vision of things. And so we never really found, it would have been wonderful to see what an Edgar Wright Ant-Man film would have been like. And once he left the film, there were extensive rewrites sort of driven by Paul Rudd that Paul Rudd went in and did. And then they brought in Peyton, is it Reed?
Peyton Reed, yep.
So I think this has one of the most boring direction styles of all of the movies. It's a lot of characters standing in rooms looking at each other in single shots talking.
Yep.
And it's just not very cinematic. At the same time, the movie does an amazing job of exploring the features of Ant-Man's power set. Like, how are the different ways you can make this power advantageous to you, and what it is about growing small that helps so that your strength goes up because your molecules are so much more compressed. There's not as much air in between them, and all the different ants and all the ways that works. That was a lot of fun.
My favorite shot from this whole thing is when they're fighting in his daughter's room and they've shrunk down and they're on the train track and the train hits them, but it cuts to what it looks like in the real world of just like this little train
Thomas,
like falling
the
over.
Tank engine.
And it pokes fun at itself. Like, the Ant-Man movie knows that it's the Ant-Man movie. Right. Like, we need to justify this to the audience. And we know that at this point they're just like Earth, are ready for a higher level of warfare. We're ready for a higher level of superhero.
Right.
And so the thought of we're getting a guy who shrinks down. What?
Right. Well, and this is the first superhero that's a divorced dad.
Yep.
He's a divorced dad. He's an ex-con. He's having trouble. His motivation.
And he's also not very good.
No, he's not.
Even when he gets his powers and he's learning it, he's not very good at what he does.
Right. But his intentions are pure. And his love for his daughter is so obvious. Another thing I really love about this movie is that there's a stepdad who is not the villain.
Right.
The stepdad is as good of a guy. Mm-hmm. He's as good of a father figure as Scott Lang. In fact, he's better in a lot of ways because he's much more stable.
Do you know what people have drawn allusions to this movie with? The movie Liar Liar. So where Cary Elwes plays the possible stepdad to Jim Carrey's son in that, and that he's the stable guy who loves his mom and he loves the boy, and he's even going to try and pretend to do the claw thing. And they said this is a similar relationship where we don't see. It's not like she married some deadbeat, who's drinking beer on the couch, and
he's actually a good guy.
He's a good guy.
The Santa Claus would be an even closer one.
Oh yeah.
Because the mom and dad don't get back together at the end.
Right.
I remember watching Liar Liar with my mom in the theater, and when they get back together, my mom went. Pfft. Right, because if you've ever been divorced, you understand there's no going back.
There's no going back.
That's not how it works. Ant-Man also has a super forgettable villain.
Yep.
Actually, Yellow Jacket.
The reason I remember that villain is because Corey Stoller, I think is the guy's name. He got killed off in House of Cards, and this was his thing. Like, hey, I was in House of Cards. Maybe you should let me. So I also think I find what they do with Hank Pym to be very interesting. When I heard Michael Douglas was going to be in this, I was like, yes, I love me some Michael Douglas.
First real serious de-aging we get, and which is, even though you can tell this is a de-age, you're like, God, they're getting a lot better at that.
Yep,
a lot.
They're really making use of it,
and I prefer it to, prosthetic.
Yep.
I prefer it to prosthetics.
Because they could have done something, right?
It takes me out less.
They could have put a bunch of makeup on his face to take away age spots.
Right.
And then just add a beard later on so he looks older. Or add a beard to make him look younger.
Is that like a hippie or something?
So, to me, I like what they did here. I also like the fact that he is a bitter... He almost is in that same situation as like Anton Vanko, where he's pissed.
Yeah.
He's like, what's Howard Stark had, that should have been mine. I'm the better scientist.
Well, that's not what's going on there, though. Howard Stark's not saying, I need to have that as mine. S.H.I.E.L.D. realizes the potential of that. And he's going, this could change the world. The Pym particle is amazing.
No, I'm saying like, as his life's work, I think that Hank Pym is always pissed off, like you said, like, screw the Starks,
right?
Like, that should have been me,
right? You never can trust a Stark,
right? Like when you are when there's two people on a high school football team and they're equally matched, and one of them wins gets the winning touchdown and becomes the homecoming king, and the other one is bitter because they never got what the other one got.
Howard Stark never gets that sort of redemption arc to sort of redeem before he dies.
Yeah, and he passes that on to his son.
Yep. Yeah.
So
the sins of the father is a prevalent theme in all of these Marvel movies. We could get into the daddy issues that all of these characters have, but I think almost all of them, with the exception of Doctor Strange and Peter Parker, have daddy issues at some point or another. And we'll get to those.
Even in the post-credit scene, so Hope, Hank Pym's daughter, wants to be a part of this, and Hank keeps her away because of the guilt he feels over losing Hope's mother into Janet. The quantum realm. So he allows, at the end, during the end credit scene, Hope to become part of this process and shows her the Wasp costume. He's going to be the new Wasp.
Yep, he's updating it for her and making new improvements. So the original lineup of the Avengers in the comics, issue number 1, and Loki was the villain in issue number 1. It's Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, Ant-Man, Wasp. That's the original lineup. Captain America didn't come into it until he was defrosted years later. So that's the original lineup. So this is the first time that we finally have all of these characters represented in some way in the MCU, but it's not until Ant-Man and the Wasp that it's fully realized.
Interesting. I like that. I like that a lot. You also get a cutscene from Captain America Civil War at the end where they're trying to like beat the programming out of Bucky. Again, I don't like when they give me a cutscene from a future movie because film something separate for me. Like I don't like going in, other than the fact that you're building in a bathroom break for me. For like, okay, this is starting. I got about a minute if I gotta go take a squirt.
Right. But you don't necessarily know that until you see that following movie, right?
Yeah, but you really get the sense. Yeah. Like you get the sense that this is going on.
They often use alternate takes. That's one thing that Marvel is amazing at doing in their promotional stuff and their trailers. They just straight out lie to you.
Yeah.
Because they're like, you don't want to know what happens in this trailer. You want to be excited for the movie. And so when you look at like later trailers for Infinity War and Endgame and some of these other big movies, Civil War, they're showing you unused takes or incomplete shots or shots before revision or straight up just fake shots that they made because they knew this would be a good shot to have in the trailer, but it has no place in the movie.
In Ant-Man, you get that great scene with him and Falcon when he has to break into the Avengers.
Love that scene. I love how embarrassed Ant-Man is by his name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm Ant-Man. You haven't heard of me.
It's also a nice like feeling like, oh, that's right. Okay, these characters.
Right.
And in that cutscene, it's not just a random cutscene, right? It's a cutscene that references to Ant-Man.
Yeah.
Sam says like, I know a guy.
Right.
So this Ant-Man ends phase 2.
Mm-hmm.
We are now to phase 3 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I haven't even been keeping track of how many films deep we are, but we're well over 10.
I mean, we're easily at our longest episode so far.
Oh, so long.
No question.
So phase 3 starts with Captain America Civil War. Mm-hmm. The one and only time I bought the graphic novel and read it before the movie came out. Because in my mind, I'm like, well, geez, I got to remind myself of who's got skin in the game at this point, because Avengers is easy because you can remember like, okay, it's Black Widow, Hawkeye, Hulk, Thor, Captain America, Iron Man. But now we've added some other people, and then we're going to continue to add other people throughout this whole thing. Civil War opens with the fanfare of the greatest Marvel movie of them all. And they talk about the balancing act and how, like, you know, it's timed out so that you don't forget about characters by spending 20 minutes somewhere else and then cutting back to someone. It deals with something that I think a lot of people can identify with in this, about whether or not, you know, this minority of the superhero people, these people with special abilities are a minority, should be tagged and tracked and are more or less property.
Right.
Versus they are having their own free will.
Right.
It's also the first time you ever see the team go against each other.
Right. So I have watched Civil War probably more than any other Marvel movie, because that, like all those things I said about Ultron, where you're getting the superheroes and they're already superheroes, that goes up. It's dialed up to 11 in Civil War. And when you have a massive media project that spans years and years and multiple titles, you always got to worry, can they stick the dismount? Will they be able to take this through to its completion? Right now, as we're recording this, Game of Thrones is in its last season, and we've got 4 episodes left, and we're all going, we love the show. It's been building up to something. Can they stick the dismount? Can they finish it and then go, wow, what an achievement? And with Civil War, that was when you really got the clue that I think they're going to do it. I think they're going to do it because the Russos clearly know what they're doing, and they have this ability to balance ensemble casts and stories, which you can see in their work on like Arrested Development and some other stuff they've done. And superhero movies or comic books are really about people with powers fighting each other. That's really it. That's the spectacle. It's not a deep source material. It's usually more about what happens when you put this person with this ability against that person with that ability, and you get so much of that. Marvel has been really good at giving us splash pages, which was a precedent set by Joss Whedon in the first Avengers, where a splash page in a comic book is it's typically the first page of a comic, but oftentimes it gets used to affect in other pieces where either the entire page or the entire 2-page spread is one giant panel. So you have all this detail going into it. And oftentimes it's where you get the heroic pose of the superheroes in battle with the villains, or some dramatic moment happening. So like the splash shot for Avengers would be that circular shot when they're in the middle of Manhattan at the Battle of New York. And then also when they've got that continuous shot where they're all fighting as a team. You've got it in Age of Ultron when they're protecting the core and Ultron's making his final push for the core. And in Civil War, it's when the two superhero teams go after each other in that first epic clash amongst all of them. And that is just pure amazing for a fan.
Yep. People just go gaga for it. And at this point, both the comic book fans and then the people like myself feel in ownership over these characters. Of these are people that I love. These are people that I have grown with.
Right.
And so to see them fighting it hits so close to home.
Right.
So close to home, right?
Yeah, and two, they're in a conflict that they could have resolved peacefully had they had the time. But it's all thrust upon them so quickly. Mm-hmm. They find out about the Sokovia Accords 3 days before it's about to be ratified at the UN. That's not enough time for them to prepare themselves, to talk to each other, to see how they figure it out. There was no debate over whether this was going to happen or not. And you understand the motivations of these characters, and they're not coming into conflict because they hate each other. They're coming into conflict because the motivations that drive them are inherently in conflict. You also get the introduction of Black Panther. Mm-hmm. You also get the return of Spider-Man to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I remember when they announced that, how crazy happy I was to find out that Spider-Man was coming back to these movies.
And it only took Sony having to make 2 lackluster Spider-Man movies after a trilogy that is ruined with a horrible 3rd movie to say, you know what? You guys can probably do a little bit better than we can.
So when that big Sony hack happened around the time that movie with Seth Rogen and
The Interview
went out. So all these Sony documents get dumped online. And amongst those documents are a lot of the back and forth between Amy Pascal from Sony and Kevin Feige from the MCU, who they've worked together for years. And I don't know I think she solicited him for his opinion on Amazing Spider-Man 2, but he gives it to her and it's written online, and he's totally right. It's the perfect critique of that movie. He hits every spot and shows how deep of an understanding of storytelling Kevin Feige actually has. And allegedly, when he went to have lunch with her later on to ask if they could use Spider-Man, apparently she threw her sandwich at him.
I've heard that the great sandwich throw.
That's such a great story. But thank goodness that Sony realized this makes financial sense. It makes storytelling sense. Let's do this. Because Tom Holland's Spider-Man is the best Spider-Man ever put on film.
Yep.
No question.
It's the Spider-Man that I feel does the most with the least backstory.
Absolutely. And they create an amazing relationship between him and Tony Stark in his first scene.
Yep.
That amazing mentorship. I also love that they introduce Aunt May as a younger woman instead of a senior citizen, because then she becomes an older sister, right?
Dial it back. We're not to that movie yet. We're not to that movie yet.
That's in Civil War, though. That's in Civil War.
I know, but just dial it back. Just dial it back. So
dial it forward, JJ. Dial it forward.
Well, then we skip Doctor Strange.
No, we're not skipping Doctor Strange.
So Civil War ends with there's a fracture between this group, and this fracture plays into what the Thanos saga needs.
Right.
The idea that these people were apart. What's it going to take to bring them back together?
Right.
Something so horrific the universe can't even fathom.
Right, and that's part of Tony's motivation is he knows there's a threat out there, but he doesn't know what it is. He doesn't know who Thanos is or the name or anything. But he's also, because he doesn't have that information, he can't show how imminent a threat it might be. Mm-hmm. But he's desperately trying to keep the Avengers together for that threat, and in doing so, he compromises his own morals and steps too greedily and too quickly, not greedily, but too quickly into that scenario.
And to me, I see they raise the stakes for Tony Stark huge
Very
in this
quickly
by showing that Captain America's best friend, this guy that he's been trying to save, is the man who killed his parents.
Right. In the most amazing third act I think we've gotten in these movies, where, there seems to be a truce when they go into that bunker, and you as a fan go, how are they going to keep fighting after this? And then you get motivation for why Iron Man is now continuing to fight with all of his strength against Captain America. And you reveal Captain America's biggest sin, which is not telling Tony what he knows about Bucky. He was allowed himself to be selfish in that moment, to not tell Tony, not to protect Bucky, but to protect his own discomfort in telling Tony something uncomfortable.
And that relationship, if you've ever had two friends who had a major falling out, yet they still end up at the same functions, birthday parties, things like that. Marvel does what we've all seen, which is that falling out and how there's an awkwardness about it, and how just seeing another person kind of makes your blood boil a little bit, and you're like, no, screw him. I'm gonna be the one who stays here.
Yeah, you start arguing in bad faith.
I also think Civil War brings up something interesting that when I talk to people, they were like, well, yeah, I totally side with Tony, with what Tony's saying here. And of course, if we kept some of this stuff in check, I totally agree with Captain America in that, he's not property.
There are a few different real life topics that this could apply to. It could be an argument about regulating gun control. It can be about taking away personal freedoms. It is also about, Captain America is the one person in that film who has a unique understanding about how corrupted large organizations are, and that he says in the movie, but those are people with agendas, and agendas change, and we need to be able to be in control of it. And you can make an argument like Tony Stark does, which is, no, we all have agendas, and agendas are good. We're trying to do something better. And I want us to self-regulate before it's forced upon us. But you can't help it. It's going to be forced upon you anyways at that point.
Also, we're to think that Robert Redford is a really good guy throughout this.
You mean in Winter Soldier?
In Winter Soldier, like they put up this idea that the government, there are people who back the government, and even though Gary Shandling's a total dick, you're like, he's doing what he thinks is best for the people. Slowly but surely, they show that apparently our government is just completely full of assholes who care about the other side. In Winter Soldier, I think you get the first time where General Ross is the one who wants to get everyone
because he's now Secretary of State.
Yep,
or Secretary of Defense. I think he's the Secretary of State.
He's a dick.
Yeah.
Bruce knows that he's a dick. They all know that this guy is a dick.
Yeah.
And it's the first time where there's no secret Hail Hydra.
Right. And that movie came up when we were going through, election and all this acrimony was coming to the surface in American life and culture. And a lot of the conversations around Civil War was of Team Cap and Team Iron Man, who was the liberal and who was the conservative. And the weird thing is that you can make an argument for them both being conservatives because Steve Rogers, you can make an argument that he's a libertarian because he believes in personal liberty and choice and freedom, but he's not cut and dried in the same way that you see libertarians, especially the loud ones, are. You can make the argument that Tony Stark is a conservative in the sense of being a neocon, in that he has an empathy gap. So his whole history is not caring about something until it happens to him, and he learns empathy. He was a warmonger. He was part of the military-industrial complex, and now he is reactionary to terroristic threats and does not care that personal liberties and freedoms could be curtailed as long as the state keeps us safe. So it's a Rorschach test of a movie where none of these motivations seem to be totally clear, but you can take your own perspective and find it there. Ultimately, it's a tragedy because this is thrust upon them before they can deal with it. Before they can deal with it in a healthy way. They get so close to compromise when Captain America's like, I didn't say it would be impossible if we can have contingencies. But then he finds out that they're keeping Wanda under lock and key. He calls it internment, even though she's in a cushy space. And yeah, she's maybe comfortable where she's at, but she doesn't have the freedom to leave. She doesn't have the freedom to be herself.
One of the things that this movie does, and this is the first time I notice it, correct me if I'm wrong, but it gives us the first major battle where there's really no civilian problems with it.
They evacuate the airport.
Yep, they evacuate the airport, and I lose a sense. I enjoy that battle a lot, don't get me wrong, but I lose the sense of imagine if these planes had been full of people, and so Ant-Man tips over and falls on a plane.
Right.
He doesn't want to hurt people. They're not going to pick a plane up and throw it at somebody. Imagine if this battle had to be contained within itself so that you were thinking about not only hurting another person, but you didn't want to hurt a civilian.
Right. In the comic books, they all get transported into the middle of Manhattan where the fight continues. And that's where...
And we're used to that. We're used to London. We're used to Manhattan. We're used to places where there are people, civilians diving out of the way.
And which is General Ross's point, right? He goes to the list of New York, Sokovia, Washington, D.C., Johannesburg, all these different places where collateral damage happens. So it in a way, it's like now that Iron Man is hypersensitive to collateral damage, once they realize that they're at the airport, the first thing they do is evacuate the airport before Iron Man goes in. Because he's like, the only way I can do this legit is I make as few pieces of collateral damage as possible. But it is also a fun playground, and we get Giant Man for the first time, which Peyton Reed tried to push back against because he wanted Giant Man to be a reveal in the second Ant-Man movie. But I'm so glad we got it in Civil War because it really changes the stakes. I also want to know if the Marvel movies have a rule where they're allowed one shit in every movie. Because,
and where's it going to be?
And who's going to get to say it? And then they start adding them more and more, because I was really surprised when Spider-Man goes, holy shit.
I think we all were, especially because he's the youngest character there. But I think also, let's face it, you said it earlier in this podcast when I swore, and hopefully we've bleeped that out. I don't know.
Probably not. More than likely not. I would be really surprised if 5-year-olds are still listening.
Kids have heard worse.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Kids have heard worse.
I'm not worried about them hearing that.
And so I think that that's a good point, because I think you've got now, 12-year-olds who are seeing this movie and saying, holy shit, while they're watching.
Right.
When they watch Rhodey fall from the sky.
Right. You've got, in Age of Ultron, Iron Man says shit right away, and Cap scolds him for his language. So they used up their one shit there. But in later movies, they start adding more. So
we should put together a supercut of Marvel shits.
All the shits.
There's one other part of this movie that just kind of, that I'm like, okay, let's go. And it's the end credit scene with the shot of Wakanda and the fact that they're putting Bucky under ice and they're taking him to Wakanda to go under ice. I know the idea behind this is that this man has killed their king, and
they want to deprogram him before he is activated again.
And that they're taking it back. But to me, I find I would have loved to have seen a scene where Captain asked them to do that and he says no, because this man killed their king. I mean, let's face it. Black Panther spends the majority of his first act in this movie trying to kill
and
Bucky.
He has that great moment with Zemo at the end where he says, vengeance has consumed you. It's consuming them. I'm done letting it consume me. Because he realizes that he was wrong, that Bucky didn't kill his dad. And then I think it makes sense that Black Panther wants to redeem himself a bit too. And we get that really nice slight hint at Wakanda. And then we get a sense that Captain America has a safe place to go before he creates the Secret Avengers. I also love the fact that the villain who had been the most successful at tearing down the Avengers was just some guy. So Baron Zemo is the name of a character in the comics. He's one of the regular Captain America villains. He was always just some military, or he had a few different costumes. I don't really think he had a power set, but the fact that the two most effective villains, one is Thanos, who is this galaxy conquering mass murderer, a titan. And then you've got Zemo, who's a human who worked in special forces, but probably wasn't a bad guy until he lost his family in Sokovia. And his whole plan is just to take them down from the inside, to tear them apart. And he's more successful than any villain up to that point. Loki didn't do that. Ultron didn't do that. No one did it.
Because his want isn't for global domination. So there's no prize at the end. Yep. All he wants to do is see destruction.
He's on a suicide mission.
Yep. And then the other end credit scene is Peter Parker sitting in bed and then puts the Spider-Man logo through the web shooter.
Yeah, which is a great callback to the comics, because Spider-Man typically had a utility belt hidden underneath his costume, and the front piece of it would send a spider signal out. So they actually gave Spider-Man a lot of Batman-esque things in the comic books. And so I liked that we kind of got that little nod to that because it wasn't the spider on his chest you would see, it was always the eyes against the mask was the symbol of the Spider-Man signal.
I like that.
I love that Tony Stark is the reason why he has a nice suit.
Yeah, me too.
Because I love the fact that this teenager just was able to cobble together whatever he could.
Yeah, it makes it they provide something with Spider-Man that I think is great, which is you don't have to explain how he made himself this amazing outfit, having no money or, seamstress abilities.
Right. And we don't need an origin story because we've seen it twice before.
Yep, it's done.
Go ahead.
And I think that's the thing. So at this point, Marvel's like, okay, who needs an origin story and who doesn't need an origin story? Because it's the lesser known characters that you're going to have to do, which the next movie is Doctor Strange, which gets so bogged down in its origin story.
One more thing about Civil War before we go to Doctor Strange. Another thing with Spider-Man that they did that was just pure fan service, and I love that they did it, was in the comic books, Spider-Man's eyes and his mask will close if he's straining, or they'll open up wider if he's surprised. And there's nothing special in the comics that makes that happen. It was always just an illustration tool to show what's happening, to illustrate that. And they give it a real purpose in the suit. And they make it a function of the suit so that he can emote in the suit without having to do the inside of the helmet shot like Tony Stark does.
Because then it would just look like another Iron Man movie. Like
exactly.
And they have to play with that. Like they have to play with these things to like, what makes this different from this? I noticed that a lot with even in, like I said, we're going into Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange, one of his commonly used things is like a shield, an energy shield in front of him. But they want to make sure that it's different than Captain America using his shield.
Oh, yeah.
So let's get into it. So Doctor Strange gets one of the oddest pieces of casting news that I think we had heard of at this point, which is Benedict Cumberbatch, who is flying high off of the television show Sherlock at this time. I think people were talking about an Academy Award nomination for him in that movie he did with Meryl Streep that I didn't care for, like August in Osage County. He's gonna join a superhero movie.
That was a piece of casting news that when I heard it, I was so happy.
Yeah,
because I thought, as Doctor Strange, I was a big fan of as a kid, and I thought that is the most perfect casting choice they could have picked for this character. I thought that they would go for someone like Daniel Day-Lewis, but when I heard Benedict Cumberbatch, I thought that's amazing. That is the perfect choice.
So Doctor Strange is the one piece of continuity that I can throw in Marvel's face is like, oh, you didn't get this one right. And this is it.
Okay.
Unless a massive amount of time passed, which they don't allude to a massive amount of time. In Captain America Winter Soldier, I believe, they are beating up somebody on the roof of a building.
It's the Agent Sitwell from Hydra.
And he references, these people they're keeping an eye on. And Stephen Strange is one of the people he references.
Yep.
In Doctor Strange, while Doctor Strange is driving, right, when he has his accident, he's being told these different cases that he could take because he wants to take only the most challenging, best cases that are going to make him better. And they allude to Rhodey, like in this. And so that doesn't mash up.
It's not a continuity error.
Really?
Nope. Because Dr. Stephen Strange was perceived as a threat by Hydra before he was the Sorcerer Supreme. They were targeting anyone that they thought could be a potential threat. So they said a valedictorian in Iowa, all these other people who weren't superheroes, because the majority of the people that they were killing would have been non-superheroes. So Dr. Stephen Strange is already a world famous surgeon. He's already incredibly intelligent. There's potential for him to go in any which way. And the algorithm that was developed by Toby Jones, I'm just blanking on his name. He's got another classic.
The Hydra scientist.
Yeah. Some fan out there is yelling at how stupid we are for not remembering the name. It's not Zemo, but it's another character. And
thank God Toby Jones, by the way, gets to be in these movies because that's a dude who gets shit on all the time.
Agreed.
When he was going to play, we mentioned this when Toby Jones was on the show, not Toby Jones, another Toby Jones. The fact that he plays Alfred Hitchcock and then, all of a sudden, Odin, Anthony Hopkins plays in the same time, and then he's like, okay, well, in this movie, I'm going to play Truman Capote, and like, Philip Seymour Hoffman's also playing Truman Capote.
Right.
But in this, he gets to be not only in Captain America: The First Avenger, but then he shows up again in Winter Soldier as like a computer, which is one of the longest monologues I think we get in the entire MCU.
I was stalling, Captain. So the reference to Stephen Strange isn't that he's a superhero. He's just a human being that could be a potential threat that the algorithm has notified. So obviously they throw it in for fan service to be like, hey, this is coming up. This guy is existing in this world.
I'm going to call that poor writing then.
I disagree.
Because
they knew exactly what they were doing.
Because then why didn't you say like, why wouldn't you call him by name? Be like, of the valedictorian here and then and then the surgeon in New York.
All these movies have Deus Ex Machina, just things that happen because it progresses the story, not because, oh, what a satisfying choice to make. And it's really just dropping it like they continually drop all these different hits. What comes out of Wakanda? All these things that hint at a larger universe that we're going to get to know more of. So I would disagree with that, but I can understand your point at the same time. What was my next point? Well, I forgot it. I could ramble on for a million years and this is what it was. When he gets that phone call, I got mistaken too, because I didn't think of the fact that he was talking about Rhodey. For some reason, I went back to Iron Man 2 when you see the footage from Justin Hammer and that guy is in the suit and then it does a full 180 degree twist and snaps his back in half. That's what I was thinking of at first, which was so dumb of me. I should have thought of course it's War Machine he's talking about.
It's all right. Doctor Strange to me is one of the movies that like you get a character that I don't know if he needed a whole movie dedicated to him.
Disagree.
Obviously, you need to get into the ancient one, and I just don't know. Like he's a character who you're supposed to watch this huge arc take place. Like he pulls a 180 degree turn from the beginning of this movie to 3/4 of the way through this movie.
Right.
I just don't think that you needed it. I think there's some great visuals in this. I think that there's a lot of time that's just spent. Like his origin story is the first 3/4 of the movie. I mean, and I just don't get into it that much. I also think it's a waste of Rachel McAdams. I love Rachel McAdams.
Agree with that.
And she's another person too who
it's the night nurse.
We keep losing all of these female characters that we set up in this.
Yeah.
We never see Liv Tyler again. Right. Instead, they're going to make Scarlett Johansson the love interest for Bruce Banner. Right. I can understand.
They're all doughy-eyed.
Right. Jane Foster, the last time we see her is in Avengers, where they say we've put her into a remote hiding place so she can study. She got a last-minute call to come check out, a telephone or something, like whatever it happens to be.
Right.
But we keep losing these female characters. Peggy Carter's niece.
Sure.
We keep losing these female characters over and over. And when Doctor Strange starts and she's in it, my first thought is like,
we probably just didn't need that character at all. We could have spent more time with Strange doing other stuff. The Doctor Strange movie doesn't just give us an intro to Doctor Strange, but it also shows us that there's another realm in this universe that we haven't tapped into yet, which is alternate realities and mysticism. And then you get the quantum realm in a later movie. And so they're establishing new frontiers. And I guess I get what you mean. Yeah, the movie is mostly him becoming Doctor Strange, because how do you get a character from being this world-renowned surgeon to being who doesn't believe in magic or anything to being the sorcerer supreme? And I think there's a lot of steps that you need to take to get there, but I can get how unsatisfying that can be. It won't be nearly as satisfying as probably the next Doctor Strange movie.
Right. And it kind of drives me nuts because at the beginning he's all about, or he's supposed to all be about logic. Right. And this is a guy who,
but his ego has got a bigger ego than Tony Stark.
So he's got this huge ego. And so that ego allows him to spend himself penniless, because there's got to be something that can fix me. There's got to be something that can fix me to give me back what I once had. I want back what I had. And at the end, he just kind of, he essentially goes back to what he's supposed to be, which is this logical thinker of like, this is this step, this is this step.
He just has more information now. He knows more about reality than he did then.
A lot of people gave God, why can't I think of her name?
Tilda Swinton
a lot of crap in this movie. I like Tilda Swinton in this.
Right. Yeah, so the ancient one in the comic books is an old Asian man. And yeah, you couldn't really do that character because that character was also a racist stereotype. He was also very much in the mode of all of the others that we've heard of and seen. And there wouldn't have been, I don't think, a way. Well, as is Wong. The Wong character in the comics is a subservient Asian, manservant. And so they were able to make that character noble and well written and not a caricature and not something like that. And with the Ancient One, I liked that they brought in Tilda Swinton, who has this amazing androgynous appeal. She's got kind of an ageless vibe to her. She seems somewhat detached. So, and also there aren't, and it was another opportunity to give a woman an opportunity at a great character versus a man. But then there was definitely conflicts amongst groups where a lot of people of Asian descent felt that they were whitewashing that character, that it could have been a great Asian character, just like Wong is, made something better of that character. And people who wanted to defend the notion that they could have made that character a white savior male, but instead they made that character female. So I think it was the right choice to bring in Tilda Swinton. I think she was amazing as the Ancient One.
My impression of the Ancient One from this is that the Ancient One has actually inhabited a lot of skins over the years.
She's Celtic.
Yep. And so this is the one that the Ancient One's most comfortable in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it's a little bit of everything, right? It's a female, but it also doesn't have any, she doesn't have any hair.
Right. She's currently the Sorcerer Supreme.
Right. And so that was kind of the feeling I got, is that I wasn't watching a woman. I was watching someone who's been around long enough to know exactly
an ancient sorcerer,
how they need to be,
with deep knowledge,
right,
who is exposed as somewhat hypocritical.
Yep.
Right. By tapping into the mirrored dimension. This movie also has a problem with a very weak villain. Caecilius is boring.
Mm-hmm.
No one cares about him.
Nope.
There are some good moments with him, but
and in all honesty,
he's done.
The big bad that Caecilius was going to use, Dormammu, is one of the things I remember leaving being like, Dormammu. Dormammu, 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 and I couldn't get very beyond that. Some real striking visuals in this movie too.
Oh yeah,
they knew that they needed to do something that if you watched this on screen, you would feel confused about where reality is.
So have you seen any of those like Grateful Dead posters?
Yep.
The neon colored ones under blacklight. So in the 60s and 70s, there was a series of Doctor Strange posters made the same way. Hyper psychedelic, gorgeous, usually a Jack Kirby illustration that if you viewed under a black light, and it would look great on the wall right next to your Grateful Dead poster, right, in the psychedelic era. And so they used that as inspiration for when they did the multiverse and when he goes on that first trip out of his body that the Ancient One sends him on. And there's a lot of really cool visuals there. And then I like the way he's able to sort of solve the issue. He's probably the most intelligent of the Marvel heroes. Maybe not the most resourceful in the way that Tony Stark is, but he's able to educate himself very quickly and is able to figure out early on that the time stone has this property he can use to trap Dormammu in a paradox.
Stephen Strange also is hindered by the fact that he does not adhere to social norms.
Right.
He's hard to talk to.
Yeah.
He is hard to, he thinks less of everybody around him.
He has none of the charm that Tony Stark has.
Right.
He's like the ego with none of the charm.
Mm-hmm. And even with Wong, he treats Wong kind of poorly in some moments too. Like he's not as smart as he is, and we find out that he's an incredibly intelligent person, and he has an intelligence that Tony doesn't possess, which is sort of this.
You mean
Stephen Strange, yeah. So while Tony has this mechanical knowledge, Stephen has this mystical knowledge, right, and those are two completely different things.
And it gives him a new power set that we haven't seen. But then, right away, Doctor Strange is now probably one of the most, if not the most powerful defender on Earth at that moment.
Right. Well, on Earth, as we learn later on.
Right. But even then, I would argue that the power sets are more powerful in different ways.
Okay. I also, before we move on to, I believe it's Guardians 2 is next after this, I want to take a moment and just talk about the Marvel one-shots, because we didn't get to these. Right. And these are little mini films that that just take place in the same universe, and some of them are really great. So after the first Thor, they released The Consultant, which is the one with Phil.
No, the Consultant is where they send in Tony Stark to talk to Ross.
That's right. It's after Captain America. A funny thing happened on the way to Thor's hammer.
Right.
We get that one. Item 47 after the Avengers is what happens when just two people pick up a Chitauri gun and what they do with it. After Iron Man 3, you get Agent Carter, which sets up the television program, more or less. Thor, The Dark World, you get All Hail the King, which I find to be the one shot that they use perfectly because it alludes to the fact that there is a real Mandarin out there, and the fake Mandarin, the Ben Kingsley one, was just sort of a MacGuffin, was a red herring for the rest of the world.
Right.
These, if you have not seen them, you can find them all online, are so worth your time to watch.
Right.
They just tell these little mini stories that are also taking place in the universe.
I have one big qualm, though, with All Hail the King, which is I'm really tired of prison rape being a joke. I'm really tired of it. And you don't see prison rape, but you see that Justin Hammer has been punked out, or is now punking out, and he's established a relationship. And while you could say that maybe he was already gay, which would be fine, but the joke there is that he is now in that sort of toxic way we try to police male gender and saying you're not a man unless you adhere to these standards. And so a lot of that is sort of there under the surface when you see that he's formed a relationship. And it's just sort of a thing that bothers me in movies, and that I understand in the past we didn't really view it with as much nuance as we do now. But I kind of think that is a joke in there that I just think falls flat, and I wish wasn't there. And I don't think we'll see it again in a Marvel movie.
No, I think Marvel movies have definitely evolved.
Right.
Even from the stuff that they find to be funny with sexism.
Right.
Has evolved.
Yep. I mean, the
along.
stuff that Tony Stark is saying in the first movie compared to now.
The stuff that he does with Black Widow in the second movie.
Right.
Where let's hire her because of her ass, pretty much.
Yeah.
Is not something that you would, I think, see come out of Tony now.
And it's certainly the first part of the arc for female characters that show that they're more powerful and far more resilient than those who would diminish them based on a fact of their birth. So at the same time, you have these sexist examples, but then it's satisfying when they're transcended by the female characters, which now we have a plethora of phenomenal female characters in the MCU.
End credit scenes in Doctor Strange, again, another cutscene that we see later on between Thor and Doctor Strange. We also see a different Thor than we've seen before. This kind of more laid back Thor, which lays a great groundwork. The refilling beer, just, if I find your brother, you're going to go back. All right, let's go.
Yeah. I like the fact that Strange now, you can tell that his knowledge is fairly vast. So he already knows who Odin is and all this other stuff. And he keeps a list of interdimensional beings that could cause harm to the planet, and Loki's on there. And we'll come to this later, but Thanos is not. Thanos is not on that list.
Oh, side note, the Doctor Strange's cape plays the best sidekick in this entire universe.
It's kind of like Aladdin's carpet.
Yep. It is so good. It's so incredibly well done. And it gives another character to this thing. Even though it doesn't speak at all, you feel for it. At one point it gets trapped under something, I think, and you're like, no, not the cape, not the cape.
Not the cape.
Another post-credit scene is when Mondo confronts Pangborn and takes away his magic because he says there are too many sorcerers.
Baron Mordo.
That's what it was. Thank you very much. And
Mordo is someone I'm excited to see more because, and I can never pronounce his name correctly, the actor who plays Mordo. But he is such a good actor, and it's sort of hinted at in the movie that he has a fairly dark past. He must have been some kind of warmonger of some kind who is sort of saved by the Ancient One. And then his zealous faith is challenged and he goes down a dark path. So I guess we'll see what he does in Doctor Strange 2.
A huge thanks to Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty for sponsoring this podcast. Folks, if you're looking to buy or sell a home, contact Natalie Deutsch today, because Natalie Deutsch is not only a previous podcast guest, she's somebody who's going to care enough to sell your property for top dollar. She's also going to find you the best price possible if you're purchasing a new home. Last year on average, Natalie earned her clients $4,000 over list price on their homes and sold them faster than the market average. On average, Natalie's selling a home every 3.74 days. That's 2 homes a week. Those numbers don't lie. Find out why Natalie is one of the top agents in this entire market. Get a hold of her today, Natalie at hatchrealtyfm.com. You can also call 701-388-9338 or go on to livefargomoorhead.com. That's livefargomoorhead.com. Read all of her amazing reviews and then listen to her episode of JJ Meets World. Thanks again to Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty. That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode of JJ Meets World and would like to help us continue to produce 2 new episodes every week, you can donate to our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/JJMeetsWorld and donate today. Even as little as $1 a month can go a long way. Visit our website at www.jjmeetsworld.com or hit up our social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the sites the kids are using these days. If you'd like to stay up to date on new episodes of JJ Meets World, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or wherever you consume the podcast that you love. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by checking out www.moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, go to linebenders.com, and you can find direct contact info for JJ.
This is typically where the Easter egg from JJ would go, but we lost that file too. Thanks, technology.